Caroline considered herself a very lucky woman. For several years now, she had been living the life she had always dreamed of. Even while studying economics in her first year of college, Caroline knew she didn't want to work in her field, or, to be honest, she didn't want to work at all. She thought it was so dull to sit in an office all day, be dependent on an alarm clock and the moods of a boss, and get a meager salary in return. Taking vacations according to a schedule rather than whenever you felt like it. She looked at her parents, older sister, and friends who lived exactly like this, and she thought she was not meant for such a life. Caroline believed her greatest asset was her striking appearance. She was naturally beautiful. By the time she was 12, she had already noticed how much boys liked her, and as she grew older, they practically ran after her. Men of all ages admired her, peers, those old enough to be her father, and sometimes even grandfathers. And Caroline learned early on how to emphasize her beauty. She was always confident that she wouldn't be alone. But she wasn't waiting for grand and pure love, she was waiting for the day she'd meet a man who would truly appreciate her extraordinary beauty, be willing to reach for the moon for her, and give her the life she dreamed of and deserved. And in this, she had no doubts, she was worthy of only the best. "I just don't get you, Caroline," her friend Daisy would say. "Do you really believe in the existence of princes?" "I believe that I will definitely meet such a man. A loving, reliable one who will do everything for me." "Well, I don't know," Daisy doubted. "Men today are so demanding and picky. You want him to do everything for you, but what can you offer him besides a pretty face and a good figure?" "I'll have something to offer, don't worry," Caroline replied. "And by the way, a pretty face and figure is already quite a lot. Plus, I'm a homemaker, I know how to cook, and I'm not afraid of housework. So, my prince will be guaranteed a cozy and clean home. Though I wouldn't mind having a maid, too. And I can keep up almost any conversation. And I will always greet him after work looking my best, manicure, pedicure, makeup, beautiful clothes. My man will never see me looking like a plain Jane in a faded bathrobe with greasy hair. And he, of course, will be generous, because beauty, even if it's natural, still requires investment. Aren't you afraid he might lose interest in you?" "Me? Uninteresting?" Caroline laughed. "Not a chance. Like I said, my husband will never see a dull fool he'd be ashamed to introduce to his friends. No, that's not my style. Trust me, I know how to keep a man if I want to." "And what about love, Caroline? Don't you believe in it at all?" "Why not?" Caroline shrugged. "Maybe one day I'll be caught by that feeling, though I'm not sure about that. I just think the most important thing for a woman is to be loved. Then a man will cherish her and treat her like a queen." When Caroline was in her final year of college, she met Barnes. He noticed the beautiful girl walking alone along the promenade. That evening, Barnes was returning from a business meeting held at a nearby restaurant. After the meeting, he suddenly felt the urge to take a stroll along the waterfront, to reminisce about his youth, the days when he and his friends often walked there. Recently, he rarely had the chance to wander around the city without rushing anywhere. He wanted to go down to the promenade, get some fresh air. On that May day, Caroline was wearing a beautiful silk dress, and she looked stunning in it. She let her long, luxurious hair down and wore elegant high heels. She walked slowly, thinking about how she would soon be graduating and would need to decide what to do next. Most of her classmates were already working part-time or looking for jobs, and the thought filled her with dread. Caroline had plenty of admirers, and she occasionally had short-lived romances, but the man she had envisioned in her dreams had yet to appear. She wasn't interested in marrying a fellow student or a man much older than herself. Barnes watched Caroline and admired her. She seemed to him like an extraordinary beauty, as if she had stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine, or perhaps even arrived from another planet. "Good evening, milady," Barnes approached her when she sat down on a bench to rest. "Good evening," Caroline replied, trying to appear indifferent, though she immediately noticed that the man was dressed expensively and tastefully. "May I sit next to you?" "Go ahead, it's not my personal bench," she replied. "But perhaps you're waiting for someone? Your boyfriend, for example." "Just say the word, and I'll leave." "No, I'm not waiting for anyone." "That's good to hear," Barnes said, his spirits lifting. "And why is that?" she asked. "It means I might have a small chance to get to know you. You are very beautiful. Although, I'm sure you hear that several times a day, so I'm hardly original. But I couldn't just walk by without telling you how much I admire your beauty. And I would be delighted to know your name." "Caroline." "And thank you for the compliment," she replied with a smile. Barnes made a good impression on her. He looked to be no more than 30, with a very pleasant appearance. No wedding ring, although, of course, that didn't necessarily mean anything. "Nice to meet you, Caroline. My name is Barnes." That evening, Caroline and Barnes talked for nearly 2 hours and even stopped by a cafe for a short while. At some point during their conversation, Caroline casually asked Barnes about his job. He mentioned that he was in the construction business. Afterward, he hailed a taxi and accompanied Caroline to her home, suggesting they meet again. Caroline gave him her phone number, and Barnes handed her his business card. Once she got home, Caroline decided to search the internet for more information about her new acquaintance. She discovered that he was indeed a co-owner of a fairly well-known construction company. She also found his profile on a social media platform. There weren't many photos, but she learned a few things. Barnes was 32 years old and, as far as she could tell, he wasn't married. Caroline had no intention of getting involved with a married man. Not because she was against breaking up someone else's family, but because she didn't want to waste her time on empty promises. Her ideal candidate for a husband had to be unattached and preferably without any prior marital experience, at the very least, with no children from previous relationships. Barnes could hardly recognize himself. If anyone had asked him before whether he believed in love at first sight, he would have said no. He had always considered himself a practical man, a trait that helped him succeed in business. And when it came to women, he never fell head over heels in love. Perhaps that was why he had remained unmarried until now. But after meeting Caroline, he was ready to believe that love at first sight might actually exist. He couldn't find any other explanation for what was happening to him. He felt an overwhelming attraction to this girl, she was constantly on his mind, and the mere thought of her ending up with someone else drove him crazy with jealousy. What else could this be but true love? Barnes had been tormented by this question for days. After their initial meeting, he had seen Caroline twice more, but it was too early to say they were in a romantic relationship. Caroline didn't refuse his invitations, and she allowed him to court her, but she hadn't yet given any indication that she was ready for a closer relationship. They dined in restaurants, walked around the city, and talked about various topics. Meanwhile, Barnes found himself falling more and more for her. He became so captivated by Caroline that he almost forgot about Nellie altogether. He had completely forgotten that he had promised to pick her up at the airport on Sunday morning. Nellie came into Barnes' life almost 2 years ago. It all started with a call from a high school friend he hadn't seen in a long time. Right after graduation, Ted had enrolled in a military academy and then went on to serve. Over the years, the friends had only managed to meet a couple of times when Ted visited his parents. Now he was back in town and suggested him meet up. "Finally, I'm in town, and you're here too. How about we meet?" "I'm only here for 2 weeks," Ted said excitedly when he found out Barnes was also in the city. "Sounds great. Should I come to you, or will you come to me? You know, the weather's so nice. Why don't we meet somewhere downtown? I've been wanting to take a riverboat cruise. Remember how we did that after graduation?" "Of course, I remember. I'd love to take a cruise and relive those days. But I should mention, I won't be coming alone." "Ah, right. You're a married man now. I'd be happy to meet her." What's her name? Agnes. She wants to bring her younger sister along. She's been buried in her books all day, preparing for exams. It's time to get her out for some fresh air. You don't mind, do you? No, of course not. Just so you know, we're not trying to set you up. Nellie is focused on her studies and doesn't seem interested in much else. Although, she's a pretty girl. We just want her to take a break from all that studying. The next day, Barnes took a taxi to the city center, where Ted was already waiting with two very attractive young women. Meet my companions, Ted introduced. This is my wife, Agnes, and Nellie, her sister. She barely agreed to step away from her books and notes. I have exams coming up, so I'm studying hard, Nellie said, slightly embarrassed. Studying is important, Barnes smiled. I'm pleased to meet such lovely ladies. But don't forget, one of them is my wife, Ted joked. A friend's wife is my friend and nothing more, Barnes reassured him. So, where to? Let's head straight to the pier and start the day with a river cruise, Ted suggested, and everyone agreed. It was a wonderful day. The group had a great time together and parted ways late in the evening. How did you find Nellie? Ted asked when he called his friend the next day. I got the impression she liked you, and you seemed to like her too. Agnes mentioned something. Nellie? Barnes pondered. She's nice, but not really my type. I've always preferred brunettes, you know that. Tastes can change, and women often change their hair color too. But Nellie is a good girl, unspoiled, kind. Someone said yesterday that he wasn't trying to set me up, Barnes reminded him. No, I didn't mean it that way. But who knows, you might like her. At that time, Barnes hadn't considered that there could be anything between him and Nellie. Yes, she was a pleasant girl, pretty, modest, and smart, but she hadn't captivated him. There was no spark. However, he ran into Nellie again soon after. It was a completely random encounter when he was walking from the parking lot to a shopping mall. Nellie was coming out of a music store, holding a guitar. Hey there. Barnes greeted her. Didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect it either. Hi, she replied. Did you buy a guitar? For whom? For myself. I've wanted a new one for a long time. You play the guitar? Barnes was surprised. Yes, why is that so surprising? Do I not look like someone who can play? No, I didn't mean that. It's just that last time you didn't mention your love for music or that you play. Well, it just didn't come up, Nellie shrugged. But now you know, I play the guitar and even sing. I'd love to hear you sometime, Barnes said sincerely. Too bad Ted and his wife have already left. We could have gone somewhere, like to the countryside. Singing by the campfire with a guitar is always great. Well, maybe we'll go sometime. Next year, when Ted and Agnes come for a vacation. Definitely. But it's a shame it won't be sooner, Barnes sighed. Alright, I should get going, Nellie said. It was nice seeing you again. Same here. Take care. In the shopping center, Barnes bought a shirt and had almost forgotten about running into Nellie when he spotted her standing at a bus stop. She had her back to him, and he was about to walk past, but then he changed his mind and approached her. Waiting for the bus, he asked. Yes, it should be here soon, she replied. How about I give you a ride home? Barnes offered. That seems a bit inconvenient for you. It's not on your way at all, she hesitated. I have the day off, and I'm not in a hurry. Come on, my car's parked not too far from here, he insisted. Well, alright, she agreed, if it's not too much trouble for you. The drive to Nellie's place took almost an hour, but Barnes didn't regret his decision to give her a lift. Nellie turned out to be an engaging conversationalist with a great sense of humor. He hadn't noticed it much during their last encounter, probably because Ted and he had done most of the talking and joking around. During this ride, Nellie revealed a new side of herself, and Barnes found himself thinking he'd like to see her again. At that moment, he wasn't considering any serious relationship, but he realized he was becoming more interested in her. He suggested they go out sometime, and Nellie agreed, but only after she finished her exams. Nellie passed her exams with flying colors and was thrilled to finally be able to relax a little. To celebrate her success, Barnes invited Nellie to a movie, and afterward, they went to dinner at a restaurant to mark her achievement. Gradually, what began as friendly outings between them blossomed into a relationship. Nellie was genuinely in love with Barnes, but he couldn't quite figure out what he felt for her. He liked her, and he found it easy and interesting to be with her. But he couldn't answer whether it was love. Nellie also won over his mother, Tabitha. She had long dreamed of her son meeting a good woman. She was proud of Barnes and loved him dearly. She had raised him on her own without a father, managed to give him a good education, and believed she had raised him well. After graduating from university, Barnes managed to find a good job. He bought his own car and apartment with his earnings, and by the age of 30, he was already well established. Tabitha was happy for her son, but she wished for him to settle down, to have a loving woman by his side who would give him children, and her, grandchildren. When Nellie came into Barnes' life, Tabitha grew fond of her. Her maternal instinct told her that with Nellie, Barnes would be happy. She often tried to nudge her son toward finally proposing to Nellie, assuring him that she would make a wonderful wife and mother. But Barnes couldn't bring himself to take that step. Nellie didn't press him on the matter, she never even brought it up herself. She just patiently waited and felt happy being by his side. And then, just when Barnes had finally decided to propose and had even bought a ring, Caroline appeared in his life. At the end of April, Nellie flew out to Boston to visit her sister. Agnes had been inviting her for a while. Nellie had hoped that one day she and Barnes would take this trip together, but he could never manage to take time off when she could. In late March, Ted and Agnes welcomed their first child, and Nellie decided she had to go. She was very eager to meet her nephew, especially since her sister had asked her to be the baby's godmother. So, Nellie took 2 weeks off and flew to Boston. "I'm so happy for you, sis," Nellie said as she and Agnes strolled through the park, pushing a stroller with little Harvey sleeping inside. "Ted loves you so much, and he's such a wonderful father. And your son is an absolute angel. This is what real family happiness looks like. Yes, I am lucky to have a husband like him. It's just a pity he often has to leave on business trips, I miss him so much. But it's his job, his duty. All I can do is love him and wait," Agnes sighed. "So, how are things with you and Barnes? Still no wedding plans?" "Not yet," Nellie replied. "Why not? You've been together for almost 2 years now. By now, you probably know each other well enough to be sure of your feelings. I'm sure about mine. But as for Barnes, I don't know. We're good together, he treats me well, but he's never talked about love. And he hasn't proposed either. Maybe you need to give him a little push. You know, some men are oddly afraid of marriage. Maybe they don't want to lose their freedom, or they have other reasons. Ted has a friend who dated a girl for 3 years but couldn't bring himself to propose. Then she suggested they break up, and only then did he realize he didn't want to lose her. Now, they've been married for 2 years and have a child. They're doing great. You think I should suggest breaking up with Barnes? But I truly love him and don't want to lose him. I'm willing to wait longer, I'm only 24. I don't want to pressure him or give him an ultimatum. Well, it's up to you. But 2 years is long enough to know whether you want to spend your life with someone. You're 24, but Barnes is 32. He's not a kid anymore. I just don't want to see you get hurt." "Agnes," Nellie said, hugging her sister. "I'm not hurting. I'm in love, and I'm happy. I don't think Barnes would be with me for this long if he didn't have any feelings for me. He's just one of those men who don't talk about their feelings but show them through their actions." "Is that so bad?" No, of course not. My Ted isn't a romantic either, but I know he's reliable and loves me. Alright, Nellie, you're smart and mature. You'll figure it out. I just love you and worry about you. I know, Agnes. I love you very much too. During her stay with her sister, Barnes called Nellie only twice. She wasn't too worried about it, thinking it was because of the time difference. During the day, Barnes was busy at work, and by the time he got home, it was already nighttime in Boston. Moreover, Nellie was so engrossed in spending time with her sister and taking care of her little nephew that she didn't miss her boyfriend much, although occasionally, looking at Harvey, she thought about how much she would also like to have a baby someday and hoped that she and Barnes would have children one day. Before leaving, Nellie and Barnes had agreed that he would pick her up for sure. Her return flight was on a Sunday, so there shouldn't have been any obstacles. But if anything urgent comes up, I'll let you know, and you can take a taxi, Barnes said on her last evening before the trip. And that was the plan. If he couldn't make it, he'd inform her. So, when Nellie landed in her hometown in the morning, she was very surprised to find that Barnes wasn't there to meet her. On top of that, her phone had run out of battery. She waited for a while, hoping that Barnes was just running late, but eventually, she decided to take a taxi home. For several days now, Caroline had been feeling happy. Could it be that she had finally met the man she had always dreamed of? He was very attractive, fairly young, and already well off. And, how lucky, he was single, never married, and had no children from previous relationships. And the way he looked at her. Caroline felt that Barnes, if he hadn't already, was about to lose his head over her. So, have you managed to catch a big fish on your hook? Daisy asked when Caroline once again asked her friend to style her hair. Yes, and I need to do everything I can to charm him so much that he won't be able to live without me. Do you think beauty alone will do the trick? Of course not. To seduce a man like him, you need a whole arsenal of tricks. But beauty is very important. Well, I don't know, Daisy replied. Look at me. I'm chubby, have a snub nose, and I'm no beauty queen, but my Jackson says I'm the best. Do you remember his girlfriend before me? She was practically a model. I still don't understand what he saw in me. You're fun, cheerful, kind, Caroline said. Maybe that model was a real piece of work. That's why I'm saying beauty is important, but it's not everything. I have to be interesting to him as a woman, as a friend, and as a person. Only then will he realize there's no one better than me. You're quite the huntress, Caroline. Daisy sighed. Yes, I am, Caroline replied with a smug smile. Nellie had barely made it home and plugged in her phone to charge when Tabitha called her. Nellie, hello, she said. How was your flight? Are you home already, or are you still driving with Barnes? I didn't call him so he wouldn't be distracted on the road, so I called you instead. Hello, Tabitha, Nellie replied, wondering how to explain that Barnes hadn't picked her up. She was afraid that Tabitha might get worried, thinking something had happened to her son. Nellie herself was anxious. She hadn't even considered that Barnes might have simply forgotten about her. So, Nellie said. Barnes probably had some urgent matters, and he couldn't get in touch with me because my phone died. What happened? Tabitha interrupted her, sounding worried. Barnes didn't pick you up. Yes, I took a taxi home. But maybe Barnes couldn't make it. Like I said, my phone died. I'll call him right now, Tabitha said and hung up. Barnes was sound asleep. He had spent Saturday evening with Caroline, and she had allowed him to kiss her goodbye. That meant that it wouldn't be long before she would be his completely. What a kiss it was. He couldn't fall asleep for half the night, replaying the feel of her soft lips in his mind. Where are you? What happened? This is the third time I'm calling you. Tabitha shouted over the phone when Barnes finally woke up, startled by the ringing. Are you alright? Mom, I'm fine. Why are you calling so early? Barnes replied, his voice still groggy with sleep. Where are you right now? His worried mother persisted. At home, of course. It's Sunday, my day off. So, I'm in bed at home. You know I always sleep in on weekends. What's with the grilling, Mom? Grilling? Tabitha was outraged. Why didn't you pick up Nellie? Nellie. Damn. Barnes squeezed his eyes shut and grabbed his hair with one hand. Today was the 15th, Nellie must have already arrived. How could he have forgotten? But then again, was it really that surprising? Caroline had taken over his feelings and thoughts so completely that there was hardly any room left for Nellie. Mom, I'm sorry, I forgot, Barnes admitted honestly. Forgot? Tabitha was stunned. How can you forget that your fiancé is flying back from vacation and needs to be picked up? Nellie isn't my fiancé, Mom. I haven't proposed to her. But you were planning to, and you even bought a ring. Yes. But now that ring is going to belong to another woman. Tabitha couldn't find peace after the conversation with Barnes. She took a sedative, but she still felt agitated inside. Who was this girl her son had known for less than 2 weeks and was already prepared to marry, calling her his destiny? How could this be possible? She didn't recognize her own son. And Tabitha couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. And she genuinely felt sorry for Nellie. She knew the girl loved Barnes, and she liked Nellie very much herself. This was exactly the kind of daughter-in-law she had dreamed of, and she had hoped that this girl would be the mother of her grandchildren. Not long ago, her son had finally told her that he was ready to propose to Nellie as soon as she returned from Boston. That was less than a month ago. Tabitha had already shared this joyful news with her friends. She couldn't help herself. She had been eagerly waiting for the return of her future daughter-in-law to dive into the delightful pre-wedding preparations. And today, her son announced that he was planning to marry another woman. Mom, you're going to love Caroline. Barnes tried to reassure her. She's wonderful, she's extraordinary. Then introduce me to her so I can see for myself, Tabitha said with a sigh, still in shock from everything she had heard. Of course, Mom, I'll introduce you soon. Then you'll understand. I hope you're not making a mistake. And please talk to Nellie, she doesn't deserve this. You're my son, and I want you to be happy, but it pains me to think that such a good girl will suffer because of you. After talking to his mother, Barnes started to think about his upcoming conversation with Nellie. He was relieved that he hadn't proposed to her yet, otherwise, the situation would have been far more complicated. As it stood, he hadn't made any promises to Nellie. Although his mother was right, Nellie didn't deserve this. But what could he do if he had truly fallen in love for the first time in his life? He and Nellie weren't married, they didn't have children, and she would find someone worthy, someone who would genuinely love her, and she would be happy. And he could only be happy with Caroline. Those were more or less the words Barnes planned to say to her when the phone rang. Nellie herself was calling, still unaware of what was happening and still concerned about him. Hi. Barnes heard her cheerful voice, a voice he had always been happy to hear not too long ago. What happened, Barnes? Are you alright? Hi. I'm okay. I'm sorry I didn't meet you. Did something come up, or did you just oversleep? Nellie, I overslept, Barnes admitted. And there's something I need to tell you right away. What is it? Nellie asked, her voice filled with concern. Nellie, you're amazing, beautiful, kind, smart, but, Barnes hesitated, gathering his courage before saying the words that would put an end to their relationship. Let me finish for you. You want to say that we aren't meant to be together and that we should break up, Nellie said. I've always been amazed at how perceptive you are. It's not that. It's just that this is the kind of thing guys usually say when they want to dump a girl. You're amazing, but I don't deserve you. Nellie. I'm sorry. I know I'm hurting you right now. But I've met someone else, and I've fallen in love. Fallen so hard that I can't think of anyone else but her. It's beyond my control. And I don't want to lie to you, so I'm just telling you the truth. Well then, I understand. I wish you luck and happiness, Nellie replied and ended the call. What was the point in continuing the conversation? Nellie wasn't the type to chase after a man or try to win him back. Yes, she loved Barnes, and his words hurt her deeply. Nellie lay down on her bed, pulling a blanket over herself, and felt tears start to stream down her face. She felt a deep sadness and emptiness inside. Just yesterday, she had been making plans and looking forward to a happy reunion with someone she thought was her soulmate. And now, that person suddenly felt distant and unfamiliar. Soon, the sleepless night she had spent on the plane began to take its toll, and she drifted off to sleep. "Hello," Caroline answered Barnes's call. "I was just thinking about you, and here you are calling." "I'm always thinking about you, Caroline," Barnes replied. "I fall asleep thinking of you and wake up the same way." "That's sweet. Shall we meet today?" "Why not? Shall we go somewhere? Or maybe you could come over to my place," Barnes suggested. "To your place? Wow. Aren't you moving a bit too fast?" Caroline asked playfully. "I just want to show you my bachelor pad. I promise I won't try anything. We can order something delicious from a restaurant, and I've got an excellent bottle of wine." "Tempting. But I have a counteroffer. You pick me up, and on the way, we'll stop by a store to buy some groceries. I'll cook dinner myself." "Wow. I wouldn't have dared to dream of such a thing." "I'm in." "All right then, see you later." "We'll talk." "See you." How will I manage to get through the day until evening? After talking with Caroline, Barnes felt like throwing open the window and shouting to the whole street, "People, I'm happy." He was overflowing with excitement and anticipation for the evening ahead. Dancing around, he headed to the bathroom to take a shower, and then his gaze fell on a satin bathrobe, a woman's bathrobe. "What an idiot I am," he exclaimed. "Inviting a girl over when the place is full of my ex's things." Although Nellie didn't live with him full-time, she often stayed over. Their relationship had lasted almost 2 years, and during that time, quite a few of her belongings had accumulated in his apartment. Barnes decided that after his shower and breakfast, he would carefully go through all the closets and corners of his apartment, gather all of Nellie's things into a large bag, and stash it somewhere. Later, he would return her belongings, ensuring there was nothing left to remind him of her. A week had passed since Nellie found out that Barnes had someone new and that they could no longer be together. She was struggling to get through the breakup. It wasn't easy to let go of feelings for someone who had lived in your thoughts and heart for so long, and who still did. Only now, the bright feeling was replaced by a bitter sense of disappointment. Nellie found solace in work and music. Her guitar was her best friend and a remedy for her heartache. "If I had only known where your meeting with Barnes would lead, I wouldn't have invited you out with me that day," Agnes berated herself while talking on the phone with her sister. "This isn't your fault," Nellie replied. "If this happened, it was meant to be. I won't hide it, I feel awful right now, but it will pass. You know I'm an optimist and try not to dwell on the bad. I admire you, sis. If my Ted did something like that, I'd lose my mind. Don't compare. You and Ted have a wonderful family, you have a son, and your love is real. Barnes never loved me. I used to delude myself, but now I see there was never any love on his part, that's why he could so easily erase me from his life. I hold no grudge against him. May he be happy with his new girl. You're too kind, sis. But I'm the opposite, I'm furious with him. Ted is, too. They even had a fight about you." "A fight? How?" "Well, Ted couldn't hold back when I told him about what happened. He blew up, called Barnes, and told him he's a complete idiot and would regret treating you so badly 100 times over. He also said that if he were there, he'd punch him." "Agnes. Ted shouldn't have called him," Nellie said. I don't want Barnes thinking I'm miserable without him and complaining to everyone. We're not everyone, we're your family. And yes, we feel guilty for introducing you to. There you go again. No one's to blame for what happened. Let's end this conversation and never bring this topic up again. It's over. Barnes was never a part of my life. Alright, Nellie, don't be mad, Agnes said. Fine, we won't talk about him anymore. Let him be happy with his scoundrel, if he can. After the conversation with her sister, Nellie felt even worse. To calm herself down, she picked up her guitar and continued working on a song. She had never written a song herself before, but just a few days ago, the lyrics came to her out of nowhere, and now she was trying to find a melody to go with them. Congratulations to me! Caroline exclaimed as she walked into Daisy's place. The wedding is in a month. You're invited. Wow! That's quick, Daisy remarked in surprise. Congratulations. Thanks. Why wait? We've realized we're meant for each other. Will you be my bridesmaid? Of course. You're my best friend. I want to look absolutely stunning on that day. There will be a lot of people from Barnes's side, and it's important for me to make a good impression on his friends and business partners. I have no doubt that every man there won't be able to take his eyes off you. As for their wives, they'll be jealous. Let them be, Caroline replied with a self-satisfied smirk. Well, I'm glad if things are serious between you and Barnes. Do you love him, at least? I don't know, Caroline shrugged. You know my take on love. The important thing is he's crazy about me. And I'll be a good wife to him, no doubt about that. Tabitha was upset. Yesterday, Barnes had introduced her to his fiancée and announced that they were getting married soon. It was time to start preparing for the wedding, but Tabitha's heart sank. She had dreamed of this event, but in her mind, the bride was someone entirely different. She didn't like Caroline. Sure, she acknowledged Caroline's striking beauty and understood why her son was so taken with her. But beauty alone isn't enough for a happy marriage, and beyond that, Tabitha saw nothing in Caroline. Even though Caroline was very polite and even charming, skillfully keeping up a conversation, it all seemed so forced, so insincere to Tabitha. But she couldn't get through to her son. Mom, I don't want to hear anything bad about Caroline. Barnes retorted. It's just hard for you to accept that I found someone else so quickly. You got used to Nellie over the past 2 years and thought she'd be my wife. But Nellie is in the past, I never loved her. It's only after meeting Caroline that I realized what real love is. Oh, son, of course, I can't change your mind. You're captivated, and that's understandable. Caroline is indeed very beautiful. I just don't see why you need to rush the wedding. You've known each other for such a short time. Mom, everything will be fine. You always wanted to see me married, dreaming of grandchildren. Just imagine how beautiful the kids will be with Caroline. I want to make her my wife as soon as possible, I want her to be the lady of my house. Oh, Barnes, sighed Tabitha. I just hope you're not making a mistake and that you'll be happy. Mom, I promise, that's exactly what will happen, Barnes assured her. Barnes got so caught up in the pre-wedding preparations that he completely forgot about the bag of Nellie's things still in one of his closets. There wasn't anything particularly valuable in there, just some clothes and cosmetics. Still, he couldn't bring himself to throw them away, after all, they were her things. When he stumbled upon the bag again, he decided it was time to call Nellie and ask what she wanted to do with them. He wasn't thrilled about calling his ex, but he knew he needed to. Finding her number in his contacts, he pressed the call button. Nellie flinched when she saw the familiar number on her phone screen. After a moment of hesitation, she answered. Hello, she heard the voice that had once been so dear to her. Sorry to bother you. Hello, Nellie replied, and she thought her voice might betray her with a tremble. What do you want? I still have some of your things here. I packed them up and wanted to ask what I should do with them. Should I bring them over to you? No need, Nellie said. Throw them away. Are you sure? Barnes's voice held a hint of relief. Yes. Is that all you wanted to ask? That's all, although. Nellie, how are you? Barnes didn't quite understand why he was asking this or what he hoped to hear in response. Me? Nellie sounded surprised. I'm fine. Strange that you care. And by the way, since you called. I know you spoke to Ted, and you two had an argument. Just so you know, I didn't ask Ted for anything, it was his own initiative. I figured that out on my own, Nellie, you didn't have to say it. I'm sorry, and I hope you find happiness. You deserve it. Goodbye, Barnes, she said and hung up. Caroline and Barnes's wedding took place at one of the city's finest restaurants. The guest list was extensive, with most attendees on the groom's side. They were mostly business partners and people with whom Barnes had professional ties. On Caroline's side, there were her parents, a few relatives, and 3 friends, including Daisy. Caroline was a stunning bride, her radiant smile never leaving her face. Barnes couldn't take his eyes off his young wife. What a beautiful couple. Congratulations, a middle-aged woman, evidently the wife of one of Barnes's business partners, approached Tabitha. Your son has great taste, the bride is simply divine. Thank you, Tabitha replied with a faint smile. Please excuse me, the woman continued. I hope you don't find me rude, but I've noticed you've seemed a bit sad all evening. You're smiling, but your eyes look sad. Is something bothering you? No, not at all, Tabitha said. It's a bit overwhelming. After all, it's not every day that your only son gets married. I understand, the stranger smiled. But they are such a beautiful couple. You can't take your eyes off them. May they be happy. Of course, our children's happiness is what matters most to us as parents, Tabitha agreed. In truth, at her son's wedding, she felt out of place. Almost everyone at this lavish celebration was a stranger to her. Tabitha had no close family, she grew up in an orphanage after losing her parents at a young age. She raised her son alone after her husband left her for another woman when Barnes was only 4 years old. He died of a heart attack a few years later. She did have friends, former colleagues she stayed in touch with, so she didn't feel lonely in her everyday life. But at this wedding, there were no familiar faces. Naturally, her son was entirely absorbed by his beautiful bride. Caroline's parents were busy socializing with their relatives, leaving Tabitha feeling sad and alone. She tried to smile, but she couldn't shake the gloom in her heart. She wanted to be happy for her son but couldn't bring herself to like Caroline. The day after the celebration, Barnes and Caroline left for their honeymoon in the Maldives, returning 2 weeks later, tanned and blissfully happy. 3 years had passed. Caroline's life was unfolding just as she had always dreamed. She and her husband lived in a spacious 3-bedroom apartment in the city center. Barnes had bought this apartment a year after their wedding at her insistence. Caroline took it upon herself to find the perfect apartment. She hired workers and a designer, chose the furniture, and ultimately set up their new home according to her taste. She consulted with her husband, of course, but he agreed with her on everything. Barnes was simply relieved that his wife was handling all the arrangements since he had no time for it. His business was thriving but demanded constant oversight and presence. Barnes didn't limit his wife's spending, which suited Caroline perfectly. His busy work schedule also worked in her favor. In the mornings, like a dutiful wife, she would get up to see him off to work, make him breakfast, brew coffee, and iron a fresh shirt. Once he left, she would hop back into bed and sleep for another 2 or 3 hours. After a good sleep, Caroline spent her time as she pleased. She watched movies, read books, went to the fitness club 3 times a week, visited beauty salons, and occasionally met with friends. She rarely cleaned the apartment herself, preferring to hire a cleaning service. She always cooked dinner herself and set the table beautifully for her husband's return. She enjoyed this routine. Out of all the household tasks, cooking was the only one she always did willingly. And Barnes loved her cooking. When Caroline and Barnes got married, they decided not to rush into having children. Caroline didn't feel ready for motherhood yet. She was only 22, had just finished college, and was looking forward to an exciting and comfortable life with Barnes. She also wanted to travel and see the world. "Let's spend a couple of years just focusing on each other," Caroline said after the wedding. "Then we can have as many kids as you want, even a whole soccer team." "No, not that many," Barnes laughed. "But I definitely wouldn't mind a couple of kids." And now, 3 years after their wedding, Barnes had begun to talk more frequently about having children. "Barnes wants to have kids," Caroline shared with Daisy when the two friends decided to meet up. "Don't you want them too? You've been married for 3 years now, it's about time." "I don't know, Daisy," Caroline shrugged. "I'm happy with how things are right now. Just thinking about sleepless nights and diapers puts me in a bad mood. It's not that I don't want kids at all, but I prefer not to have them before I'm 30. But Barnes is insisting. He's already 35. And I'm sure his mom is probably nagging him about grandchildren too. How are things between you and your mother-in-law, by the way?" "They're fine. We're not in love with each other, but we keep things polite. Thankfully, she doesn't interfere in our lives, but I'm sure when Barnes visits her, she says something or other about me. And she's probably asking when we're going to make her a grandmother. Honestly, I'd be happy to live another 5 years without kids. But if your husband insists on having kids, it's probably better to agree with him." "That's what I think. I'm afraid I'll have to," Caroline sighed. "I'm also terrified of gaining weight during pregnancy. You know how I'm always on a diet, I'm prone to gaining weight." "Caroline, having kids isn't as scary as you think. I love spending time with my nieces and nephews, and I'm already thinking about having a child myself. But Jackson says we need to wait a couple more years until he pays off his loan. I'd be thrilled if he insisted on having a baby like your husband does. So, go for it. A child will only strengthen your family. Barnes already treats you like a queen, and once you have his baby, he'll spoil you even more." "Maybe you're right," Caroline mused. "Last weekend, we visited some friends, and they had a 2-year-old. Barnes was playing with him the whole time, the boy wouldn't leave his side. I think he'll make a great father. I don't see what you're afraid of. If needed, you can hire a nanny. And I'm sure your mother-in-law would be happy to babysit her grandchild." "Yes, Daisy, a nanny is a great idea," Caroline said, feeling more enthusiastic. "Maybe it really is time for me to get pregnant." 3 months later, Caroline told her husband she was expecting a baby. He was overjoyed with the news. That evening, Barnes took Caroline out to a restaurant where he had reserved a table in advance to celebrate. During dinner, he presented her with a small box. When Caroline opened it, she was delighted. She put on the gift, a white gold bracelet with diamonds. "Thank you, my love. You're the best," Caroline said. "No, you're the best, my most precious treasure in the world," Barnes replied, gazing at her tenderly. "And I'm so happy that soon there will be 3 of us. Aren't you worried I'll gain weight?" Caroline asked. "I'm already getting such a huge appetite. I'm not worried, I love you. Besides, I have no doubt you'll get back in shape quickly after the baby." "Of course," Caroline smiled. "Can I order another dessert? It's just so delicious." "Here comes Mommy," Tabitha said to little Lyle as she played with her grandson at the playground. "Tabitha, thank you for agreeing to watch Lyle today," Nellie said, kissing the little boy. "Hello, my dear." "Oh, Nellie, it's such a joy for me. I'm so grateful to you for letting me see my grandson. He looks so much like Barnes." "Tabitha, but you do remember our agreement, right? Barnes must never know that he has a son." "Of course, Nellie, don't worry, I won't say a word to him," she replied. But in her heart, she felt a deep sadness that her son was living his life unaware of Lyle's existence. Deep down, she hoped that one day, Nellie would allow her to tell Barnes that he has a son. Nellie found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after she and Barnes had parted ways. Not long ago, this news would have made her very happy, but now she didn't know what to do. At first, she decided not to keep the baby. Why should she have a child if the father had left her? The last thing Nellie wanted was to become a single mother. She decided not to tell anyone about her pregnancy and booked an appointment with a doctor. "You're young, healthy, it's the perfect time to have a baby," Nellie's gynecologist said after an examination. "It's not my place, but why don't you want to keep the child?" "The circumstances are just not right," Nellie replied. "Circumstances?" The doctor shook her head. "And then women come to me crying that they can't conceive because once upon a time, they had circumstances. What kind of reasons could there be? Did the man leave? So what? These days, nobody points fingers at a woman who has a child without a husband. Is it money? That can be managed, especially now that the government supports low-income families. Want to build a career? A child doesn't prevent that either, kids grow up fast. Every situation is different," Nellie said quietly. "Nellie," the doctor looked at her intently. "Listen to me. When women come to me with 2 or more kids and want to terminate another pregnancy, I understand. But when young women like you, who are experiencing their first pregnancy, come in wanting to terminate it, it breaks my heart. I always try to dissuade them, even though I know it's not my business. Do you understand that you might be depriving yourself of the joy of motherhood forever?" "But it doesn't have to be that way," Nellie responded. "No, it doesn't, but the risk is always there, and it's quite significant." "All right, I'll think about it," Nellie said. The truth was, Nellie had already started doubting her decision on her way to the doctor. Not far from the clinic, there was a playground where children were playing, and young mothers with strollers sat on benches. Watching them, Nellie remembered her nephew Harvey and how she had dreamed of having a child with Barnes. Now, leaving the clinic, she walked over to the playground and sat on one of the benches. She watched the children playing and thought that maybe Barnes had come into her life not just to bring her pain and disappointment but for something else. With these thoughts, Nellie went back home and decided to keep the baby. But now Nellie was troubled by another dilemma: should she tell Barnes about her pregnancy? On one hand, he was the father and had a right to know. But on the other, what would it change? He was in love and happy with another woman, and the news that his ex-girlfriend was pregnant would hardly bring him joy. The last thing Nellie wanted was for Barnes to think she was using this as a way to win him back. The very thought of it made Nellie sick. And if she made it clear from the start that she wasn't expecting anything from him, just informing him that he would have a son, knowing Barnes, it was easy to guess what would happen: he wouldn't refuse to acknowledge his son. He would want to see him and be involved in his upbringing. And that would mean Nellie would have to see him regularly and maintain some kind of relationship with him for the child's sake. That thought didn't sit well with her either. And what if he decided to take the child away from her altogether? He was much more financially stable, had his own home, unlike Nellie, who still lived with her parents. He had connections and money, all the things she didn't have. Sure, his new girlfriend might not want another woman's child in her life, but still, she couldn't entirely rule out that possibility. All these thoughts swirled in Nellie's mind, and she ultimately decided that Barnes shouldn't know about the baby. She could handle this on her own. She had her parents, who would undoubtedly support her. She would have the baby and raise him herself. Nellie's parents, of course, supported their daughter, though they did advise her to tell the baby's father the news. But Nellie refused. She got a solemn promise from Agnes that she and Ted would never tell Barnes the truth. "Ted doesn't talk to Barnes anymore," Agnes reassured her sister. "Of course, we won't say anything, it's your decision. I don't agree with you on this, but I'm not going to interfere." 7 months later, Nellie gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she decided to name Lyle. The first time she looked at her son, she loved him with all her heart and thanked fate for steering her away from making the wrong choice. The young mother threw herself into caring for her baby, who she now considered the purpose of her life. Her parents helped her, but Nellie didn't want to rely on them entirely. So, when Lyle turned 3 months old, she decided to go back to work. Her employer was accommodating, allowing her to work remotely. When the baby was a year and a half old, Nellie started noticing that he occasionally developed a rash on his skin. It looked like an allergy, but the young mother couldn't figure out what was causing it. So, Nellie decided to consult a doctor. Her aunt recommended a good allergist, and the young mom booked an appointment. At the appointed time, Nellie arrived at the clinic with her son. There were still 20 minutes left before the doctor's appointment, so the young mother sat down on a couch and pulled a children's book out of her bag to entertain Lyle. The boy loved looking at pictures. "Nellie," she heard a familiar voice. Looking up, she saw her would-be mother-in-law, Tabitha, standing in front of her. "Oh no, not this," Nellie thought. But she had no choice but to greet her. "Good afternoon, Tabitha." "Hello, Nellie. I didn't expect to see you here." "Yes, it's quite unexpected," Nellie replied. She noticed that Tabitha couldn't take her eyes off her son, which made Nellie feel uncomfortable. "This lovely little boy is yours." "He's my nephew," Nellie lied, cutting the woman off before she could finish. "Nephew?" Tabitha echoed, surprised. "How old is he?" "He's a year and a half. My sister's youngest son," Nellie replied. "I see. He's a very sweet child. Is he feeling unwell?" "Yes, there are a few issues," Nellie said, eager to end the conversation as quickly as possible. But Tabitha continued standing there, studying the boy intently. "What's your nephew's name?" "Lyle." "I see. Well, Nellie, it was nice to see you. It seems like you're doing well." "Yes, everything is great." "And it was nice seeing you too," Nellie said, though it was far from the truth. Back home, Tabitha immediately took down an album of her son's childhood photos and began studying them. She remembered Lyle's face clearly. It didn't take long for her to realize that Nellie had lied. She was never good at lying. Could it be that he's Barnes' son? Tabitha wondered as she examined the photographs. The same eyes, nose, lips. He looks so much like him. And the timing matches if the boy is a year and a half old. Feeling quite shaken, she quickly took a calming pill. She decided not to say anything to Barnes just yet, but she would call Nellie. What a coincidence. How did she end up at the same clinic as us? Nellie thought as she left the clinic with her son. And what should I do now? Did she believe that he's my nephew? She kept staring, unable to take her eyes off Lyle. And what if she tells Barnes? These thoughts unsettled Nellie. She didn't like this situation at all. Not one bit. That evening, Tabitha called Nellie. "Nellie, I'm sorry for intruding into your life," Tabitha began. "I know my son hurt you deeply, but I've always liked you, and I was very upset when you two broke up." "It's all in the past, Tabitha," Nellie replied. "I've always cared about you too, and none of this was your fault." "Nellie, I can't stop thinking about our meeting today. That boy, Lyle. Is he really your nephew?" "Yes." "Why are you asking again?" Nellie replied, knowing full well what she was getting at. "He looks so much like Barnes. I looked through the photos at home, and it's uncanny." "And what are you trying to say, Tabitha?" Nellie felt a chill inside. "Nellie, tell me the truth. Is Lyle Barnes' son?" "Tabitha, Lyle is my son. And only mine. Barnes has nothing to do with him," Nellie answered sharply. "I understand you're angry and hurt by Barnes, but please don't lie to me. I'm very old now. How much time do I have left? I would be so happy to know I have a grandson." Barnes and his wife don't have children, and who knows if they ever will. It seems like she doesn't even want to have any. I'm not interested in Barnes' life or his wife's, Nellie said. Okay, I'll tell you the truth. Lyle is your grandson, but I don't want Barnes to know about his existence. But why? That's my decision, and I want things to stay as they are. So I'm asking you, please don't tell Barnes anything. Please. I understand, Nellie, the woman sighed. I won't say a word. But could you at least let me see my grandson from time to time? I don't know, Nellie replied. I'll think about it. But once again, I'm asking you not to tell Barnes anything. Of course, I promise, I won't say a word. Just let me see Lyle. I'll call you, Nellie said. Goodbye. She couldn't refuse the elderly woman's desire to see her grandson, and from then on, Tabitha occasionally visited Nellie to spend time with the boy. Occasionally, Nellie would ask her to babysit him when she needed to run some urgent errands. But there was an agreement between them. Nellie allowed the grandmother to see her grandson on the condition that Barnes would never know about his son. After learning that Barnes and his wife didn't have children, Nellie feared that if Barnes found out about Lyle, he might try to take him away from her. Mom, we have some great news for you, Barnes said the moment Tabitha opened the door. Put the kettle on, we bought a cake. We have something to celebrate. All right, come in, Tabitha smiled and hurried to the kitchen. A few days ago, Caroline had gone to the hospital for a prenatal checkup, had all the necessary tests done, and underwent an ultrasound. The doctor confirmed that she was healthy and that the pregnancy was progressing without any complications. Barnes decided it was time to share this joyous news with his mother. He knew how much Tabitha dreamed of having grandchildren. He also suspected that she still wasn't too fond of his wife, although she never said so directly. Barnes thought that knowing Caroline was pregnant might change his mother's attitude toward her. So, what's the news? Tabitha asked as she poured tea into cups. Mom, Caroline and I are going to have a baby. Barnes announced, cutting into the cake. Really? Tabitha said, her hand trembling as she held the teapot. She sat down on a chair. She had expected to hear anything but news of her daughter-in-law's pregnancy, and for some reason, she wasn't very pleased by it. Aren't you happy, Tabitha? Caroline asked, noticing the strange reaction from her mother-in-law. Why, of course, I'm happy, Tabitha replied. It's just, so unexpected. Mom. What's so unexpected about it? Barnes said, surprised. Caroline and I have been married for over 3 years now. It's about time we became parents. And I know you've been dreaming of grandchildren. Yes, of course, Barnes. I don't know why I was so surprised. I suppose I'm just getting so old that even very good news shocks me. Oh, come on, Tabitha. You're not old. We'll find you a new husband, Caroline joked to cheer up her mother-in-law. A husband? Right, Tabitha waved it off. Anyway, let's have some tea. Caroline, how far along are you? About 9 weeks now, Caroline answered. And how are you feeling? Everything's great. Caroline smiled, taking a bite of cake. It's delicious. I've already gained 2 kilos. I'll soon need to update my wardrobe. Well, that's normal, Tabitha forced a smile. And these days, they make such beautiful clothes for pregnant women, and there are special stores too. Not like in my day. I remember when I was expecting Barnes, I had only one loose sundress. Money was tight, Barnes's father didn't earn much. Oh, why am I talking about sad things? You're celebrating, and I'm reminiscing about tough times. Mom, it's okay, don't worry. I know you had a hard life, but now everything is fine, you have everything you need, and you have us. And soon, a baby will be born. That's true happiness. Happiness, Tabitha nodded. But in her mind, she kept hearing little Lyle's sweet voice. Oh, if only Barnes knew what a miracle was growing up. Daughter, aren't you afraid that Tabitha might eventually tell your ex about Lyle? Nellie's mother, Frances, asked her. I'm afraid, Mom, Nellie admitted. And you know, deep down, I understand how much she might want to tell Barnes about Lyle. But I'm not ready yet, and I really hope she keeps it a secret. Will you never tell Barnes about your son? I think it's wrong to keep it from him. Plus, Lyle is growing up without a father. Soon enough, he'll start asking questions about his dad. What will you tell him? I don't know, Nellie said, deep in thought. I keep thinking about this all the time and can't shake the feeling that I'm being unfair. I try to justify myself by saying that Barnes left me, and he has his own life now, with a family and children of his own. But still, I can't stop feeling that I'm doing something wrong by keeping the child from him. It's not right for Lyle either. What should I do, Mom? Sweetheart, you're confused. And you know, I think you're just afraid of facing Barnes. Afraid that old feelings might resurface and that you'll suffer again. Frances hugged Nellie. Yes, that's what I'm afraid of, Nellie admitted. Maybe I'm being selfish. It seems like I'm thinking first about myself, not about my son who has the right to see his father. And not about Barnes, who also has the right to know everything. And there's still resentment in me, even though I try to convince myself that I hold no grudge against Barnes. But can you really deceive yourself? You're a smart girl and you understand everything. I think it's time to stop hiding your son from his father. And don't think the worst. I'll think about it, Nellie promised. I feel uncomfortable living a lie and fearing that the truth will come out. Caroline and Barnes had a wonderful weekend away from the city. They had gone to a guest house where they spent 2 days enjoying the fresh air, beautiful weather, and picturesque views. On Monday morning, Caroline, as usual, got up early to prepare breakfast for her husband and see him off to work. She was feeling unwell, even though she expected to feel great after their delightful weekend in nature. Instead, she had a slight headache and a pulling sensation in her lower abdomen. Pregnancy is quite a challenge, Caroline thought, feeling a bit anxious about her condition. Deciding that nothing serious was happening, Caroline saw her husband off, returned to bed, and soon fell asleep. She woke up to a worsening pain in her lower abdomen, threw off the covers to get out of bed, and saw crimson spots on the sheet. Panicked, Caroline immediately tried calling her husband, but he didn't answer. She called for an ambulance and began to prepare to leave. Caroline was brought to the hospital in time, where doctors did everything they could to stop the bleeding and preserve the pregnancy. You'll have to stay here for a while, the gynecologist told Caroline. There's still a risk of miscarriage. I can't let you go home. All right, as you say, Caroline sighed. But why did this happen? I was just at the gynecologist a few days ago, and everything was fine. I can't say for sure, the doctor replied. Maybe you were under a lot of stress or overexerted yourself physically. No, not at all, Caroline shook her head. I haven't had any stress or physical exertion. You're young and healthy, so let's hope everything will be all right. But you need to take care of yourself, the doctor said. Rest now. Try to get some sleep. Barnes drove to the hospital in a terrible mood. He was deeply worried about Caroline and their future child. He cursed himself for having forgotten his phone at the office in the rush to leave. The rush was caused by a tragic event. There had been a fire at one of the company's construction material warehouses. The cause of the fire was still unknown and under investigation by the police. The damage was extensive, almost everything had burned down. Returning to the office, Barnes saw several missed calls from his wife and immediately called her back. Upon learning that Caroline had been rushed to the hospital with a risk of miscarriage, he rushed there. He decided not to tell her about the fire to avoid adding to her worries. In fact, he had been hiding serious work problems from Caroline for several days, hoping he could resolve them. And now, with the fire and Caroline in the hospital, he wondered if this was the end of the good times and the start of a streak of bad luck. After leaving the hospital, Barnes went back to the office and didn't return home until late in the evening. He walked into the empty apartment where no one greeted him and felt a profound sadness. He missed Caroline terribly, who always greeted him with a smile and a good mood, prepared delicious dinners, and set the table beautifully. Coming home, Barnes knew that no matter how stressful or difficult his day was, there was a little celebration waiting for him. But today, for the first time in 3 years, no one was there to greet him. The apartment was so quiet that he felt uneasy. Barnes suddenly felt a strong hunger and remembered that aside from breakfast, he had eaten nothing else that day. He looked in the fridge and found a piece of roast pork, made himself a sandwich, and washed it down with a glass of milk. Then he undressed and lay down on the couch in the living room, covering himself with a blanket. He didn't even want to go into the bedroom. Within 10 minutes, Barnes was fast asleep. "Nellie, I know you don't like me talking about Barnes and his wife, but I think you should know," Tabitha said, bracing herself. "What should I know?" "Barnes is going to have a child, Caroline is pregnant." "Well, that's good," Nellie replied after a brief silence. "It's normal for families to have children, that's how it should be." "Yes, of course. I thought Caroline wasn't the type of woman who wanted motherhood." "Why do you say that?" Nellie asked. She really didn't like any mention of Barnes and his wife, fearing it would be painful. But now she realized that the news of Caroline's pregnancy didn't affect her as much. "You know, Nellie, when Barnes told me he was breaking up with you to marry someone else, I was in complete shock," Tabitha began. "I had grown used to you and was sure you and my son would get married. Especially since Barnes had already bought a ring for you." "A ring?" Nellie was surprised. "Are you saying he was planning to propose to me?" "Yes, he was," Tabitha said, thinking to herself that she might have revealed too much. "He told me about it when you went to visit your sister. He was waiting for your return to propose. But then he met Caroline and lost his head. And it's good that he didn't propose to me," Nellie sighed. "Things could have been much worse." "So, what about Caroline? Why don't you like her?" "She struck me as insincere. A gold digger. If you truly loved my son, as I could see, then I have serious doubts about Caroline's feelings." Barnes fell for her looks. But she clearly sought personal gain. If he weren't wealthy, I doubt she would have agreed to marry him so quickly. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that she's with Barnes only for the money. She likes the comfortable life. She graduated from college but hasn't even tried to find a job. Is Barnes happy with her? Nellie wondered to herself. She was speaking so calmly with Tabitha about her son, as if he weren't the man she had once loved deeply and suffered from their breakup. It now seemed to her as if they were discussing just an acquaintance. Was it possible that she no longer loved Barnes? "They are living well, happily. Barnes is happy, I can see that. Then I don't understand you. If your son is happy, you should be glad for him. Maybe Caroline was initially after financial gain, but she might come to love him for real. Have you considered that? It's strange, Nellie, that you're defending Caroline. I'm not defending her, I've never even met her. But if Barnes is happy with her, then you shouldn't worry. Besides, they're about to have a baby, and you'll have a grandson. Isn't that what you wanted?" "You're right, Nellie. I should be happy for my son. And perhaps I'm not being fair to Caroline. I hope everything turns out well for her." Caroline was admitted to the hospital with a risk of miscarriage. "Oh. And how is she now?" "She's under observation at the hospital. But it seems the danger has passed." "Nellie, maybe you should consider telling Barnes about Lyle?" Tabitha asked. "I'm thinking about it," Nellie replied. "But I haven't decided how to do it yet. Barnes will soon have a child with the woman he loves, how will he react to finding out about Lyle? And it's not just for Barnes that I want to tell the truth, but for my son. He'll start asking questions about why he doesn't have a father. Nellie, I'm so glad you're willing to tell Barnes the truth. And Lyle should finally meet his father. Tabitha, please don't rush me. I will tell Barnes about our son, but I need to gather my courage first. For several days now, Caroline had been on bed rest in the hospital. Barnes visited her every day, bringing fruit and homemade food prepared by Tabitha. Maybe you shouldn't have refused a private room? Barnes asked. The conditions are much better there. I'd die of boredom there, Caroline replied. And in our 4-person room, you know, it's quite lively. We have a great group. Last night we spent the whole evening sharing funny stories from our lives. I haven't laughed so much in years. No, I don't want a private room. I'm glad you're in good spirits. It's so dull at home without you, I don't want to come back. I should be discharged next week, so hang in there. You know I'm not here by choice. I just want everything to be okay with the baby. Of course. I was so scared for you and our baby. You mean a lot to me, well, you both do, Barnes said as he hugged his wife. Business at the firm was getting worse, but he didn't want to think about it right now. All that mattered was that Caroline and the baby were okay. You look tired, Caroline said, observing her husband closely. Is it a lot of work, or are you not sleeping well? Or are there other problems? Tell me. No, it's nothing. Everything's fine, just a lot of work, Barnes said. Don't worry about me. The main thing is to take care of yourself. And remember, I love you very much. After saying goodbye to her husband, Caroline returned to her room. Lately, being in the hospital had given Caroline plenty of time to think, and she realized she really wanted to have this baby. The women in her room spoke with such tenderness and warmth about their children. They were all preparing to become mothers again, some for the second or even third time. Suddenly, Caroline felt a deep affection for her baby. She constantly wondered whether it would be a boy or a girl and even began picking out names. She felt both comforted and anxious. She was afraid of losing the baby and decided she would be very careful from now on, consulting a doctor at the first sign of discomfort. Barnes was driving home, thinking about what he should do. Problems at work were piling up one after another. People he trusted had let him down. Everything that had been built up over years of hard work was now collapsing before his eyes. And why did it all have to happen now, just when he and Caroline were expecting a baby? You look completely worn out, son, Tabitha said when he stopped by her place the next day. Let me go to the hospital for you so you can rest. I don't like how you look. You seem so tired. Thanks, Mom, but I'll go myself. I'm afraid Caroline will be upset if I don't show up. But you're not a robot, you're a human and can get tired. You can talk to her on the phone. Let me take a taxi and go for you. No, Mom, it's okay. I'll visit Caroline and then head home. I promise I'll go to bed earlier tonight. Well, Barnes, if you need anything, you can count on me. Thanks, Mom. By the way, Caroline asked me to bring her something to read. I meant to stop by a bookstore but forgot. Can I borrow something from you? Of course, check my bookshelf in my room and pick out something. I'll prepare some dinner for you to take home. Thanks, Mom. Barnes called out from the room as he browsed through the books. He picked out a couple of detective novels, knowing that Caroline liked them, and was about to leave when his eye caught an old, tattered book. This was a children's book of fairy tales. Barnes remembered that it was one of his favorite books as a child. He had read it many times. That's why the book was so worn out. His hand instinctively reached for it, and Barnes pulled it off the shelf. He opened it and began to flip through the pages. Suddenly, as he turned another page, he saw a photograph. A little boy, about 2 years old, was looking back at him with big brown eyes and dark hair. The boy's face seemed very familiar, but Barnes couldn't quite place who it was. And then, it hit him like a bolt of lightning. This boy looked like him as a child. But who was this boy? The photograph seemed recent. And why did they look so much alike? At that moment, Tabitha walked into the room. Have you chosen something? I've packed everything. The woman turned pale when she saw her son holding the photograph of Lyle. Mom, who is this child in the photo? Barnes asked. He looks so much like me when I was a kid. Tabitha felt her head spin, and her heart started pounding. How could she have been so careless? She only had one photo of her grandson, which she had asked Nellie for, promising that Barnes would never see it. So, she had tucked the photo into one of the children's books. And of all the books, her son had to pick this one. What should she do now? Mom, who is this boy in the photograph? Barnes repeated his question. Tabitha sat down in a chair and said, Barnes, sit down. This is going to be a difficult conversation. Barnes pulled up a chair and sat opposite his mother. I'm listening, Mom. Barnes, this boy's name is Lyle, and he is your son. My son. Barnes laughed. Mom, what kind of nonsense is this? I don't have any children. I hope to have some soon, but not yet. This is Nellie's child, Barnes. Nellie? But. Barnes hesitated. Are you saying that Nellie had a child by me and has been hiding it? Yes, son. After you two broke up, Nellie found out she was pregnant. She decided to keep the child, but she didn't tell you because you were so in love and happy with Caroline. Interesting. Barnes said after a brief silence. So, she decided to hide it from me but told you. So, you've known all this time that I have a son and said nothing? Mom, I can't believe you would do this to me. Barnes, I found out about Lyle completely by accident. Remember when I was taking that therapeutic massage course at the clinic? That was over a year ago. Well, that's where I met Nellie with the boy. She was bringing him to see an allergist. I went up to say hello, and we talked. Nellie said the boy was her nephew. But I didn't believe her, Lyle looked too much like you. Eventually, I called Nellie, and she admitted it. She allowed me to see my grandson but on the condition that I wouldn't tell you anything. I'm sorry, Barnes. I was just waiting for her to be ready to tell you herself. Barnes stood up and paced around the room. Inside, he was boiling with so many emotions that he couldn't even understand what he was feeling: hurt, anger, joy, and confusion about what to do next. He had lived in ignorance for so long, not knowing he had a son growing up somewhere. Barnes, I'm sorry, Tabitha repeated. I'm truly sorry, but if I hadn't run into Nellie by chance, I wouldn't have known about Lyle's existence either. It was Nellie's decision, and you can understand her too. You left her, and she didn't want to impose, didn't want you to think she was trying to get you back by tying you down with a child. What? Barnes exclaimed. She made decisions for both of us, and for the child. What right did she have to deprive a son of his father? And you're defending her. I'm not defending her, Barnes. I'm just trying to understand. And you should try to understand too. She was deeply hurt. Put yourself in her shoes. While you were enjoying your happiness with Caroline, Nellie was suffering. She truly loved you, unlike your. Tabitha hesitated. You were going to say that Caroline doesn't love me. Is that right? I don't know, son. I've always felt that Caroline is with you only for the money. Really? Well, we'll soon find out if that's true. What do you mean, Barnes? Tabitha asked, alarmed. I'm in big trouble, Mom. Really big. I won't go into all the details, but things are really bad at my company. I've already spent all my savings and even gone into debt to try to save the situation, but I'm afraid I might have to sell everything for next to nothing to avoid more serious problems. Oh God, son, Tabitha clutched her chest. You're scaring me. Is someone threatening you? Is your life in danger? Mom, Barnes said, my life isn't in danger, please don't worry so much. I've just nearly lost my business, and I'm not rich anymore. I'm going to have to either find a job or start from scratch. But I'm alive and healthy, and that's what matters. Yes, what matters is that you're alive and healthy, Tabitha agreed. I felt like something was going on with you, but I thought it was all because you were worried about Caroline. But it turns out you have such big problems. And is there really nothing that can be done? I'm afraid not. I've done everything I could. Unfortunately, where there's big money, there are always plenty of people who are envious. I trusted some people too much and paid the price for it. I was so happy that I ignored some things. Maybe it's for the best that things turned out this way and you found that photograph, Tabitha said. Nellie told me just the other day that she's thinking about telling you the truth herself. Mom, I'm going to Caroline's now and then to Nellie's. Just don't call her, okay? There's no need to warn her that I know everything. Who knows what she might do if she's forewarned? I won't call her, don't worry. I just feel so bad now for telling you everything without her permission. Barnes, just don't blame Nellie or fight with her. She is the mother of your son, and Lyle is such a wonderful, amazing boy. I'm glad you'll finally get to meet him. All the way from his mother's house to the hospital, Barnes couldn't stop thinking about Nellie and his son. He was eager to see the boy and finally meet him. At the same time, he was angry with Nellie. He felt it was incredibly deceitful of her to hide the birth of his child. Of course, he wouldn't have left Caroline if he had known about his ex-girlfriend's pregnancy, but he certainly would have been involved in raising the boy. He would have done everything to make sure the child didn't grow up without a father. Barnes then thought about Caroline. How would she react to the news that he has a son? She likely wouldn't take it well. No, he wants to meet his son, spend time with him, and make up for lost time. But what about Caroline? She can't be stressed right now, especially since she's about to learn that he's lost his business. And now, on top of that, she'll have to get used to the idea that her husband has a son with his ex-girlfriend. Nellie was at the playground with her son when a car pulled up nearby, and Barnes stepped out, walking toward her with a determined stride. She recognized him immediately, and a wave of anxiety washed over her. What does this mean? Did Tabitha break her promise and tell him everything? Hi, Nellie, Barnes said, stopping beside her, his eyes searching for his son. Lyle was climbing up the slide at that moment. Hi, Nellie replied. I take it you know everything now. Did your mom tell you? She wasn't planning to, but I found a photo of Lyle in one of the children's books. Then she had to come clean. I see, Nellie said, looking at Barnes, unsure of what she felt. She had imagined this encounter so many times, dreamt about it. And now, here was Barnes standing in front of her, but she couldn't quite grasp what this meeting meant to her yet. Shall we sit? Barnes suggested, nodding toward an empty bench. We need to talk. All right, let's talk. I was really angry with you today when I found out, but I calmed down on the way here. I realized I don't want to fight with you. There's no point. I understand that I hurt you too. I just want Lyle to know he has a father now. I want to see him, watch him grow. He looks so much like me, it's such a strange feeling to look at a child and see a little copy of yourself. I was already ready to tell you about him myself. Lyle shouldn't have to suffer because we couldn't make it as a family. But how will your wife react to this news? I've decided not to tell her yet. She's on bed rest right now. Yes, your mom told me. I don't want to upset her. But I will tell her eventually. I don't want to lie to her. Lies never lead to anything good. Agreed, Nellie nodded. At that moment, a breathless Lyle ran up to them. Hey, little guy, Barnes smiled. The boy looked at him carefully, then glanced at his mom. Lyle, this is Barnes. He's your dad, Nellie said. Dad? The boy repeated. Yes, Barnes nodded and stood up. "I've got a present for you. Be right back." A few minutes later, he returned with a big, bright box and handed it to Lyle. "What do you say, sweetheart?" Nellie prompted. "Thank you," the boy said cheerfully. When Barnes left and Nellie returned home with Lyle, she realized she felt much lighter. Why had she been so afraid to tell Barnes about their son for so long? How much longer would she have waited to reveal the truth if Barnes hadn't stumbled upon that photograph? "Will Dad come again?" Lyle asked as his mom read him a bedtime story. "Of course, sweetheart, he will definitely come," Nellie smiled. She sat by his bed for a long time, watching her son sleep and thinking about Barnes. She was glad to feel no more anger, jealousy, or resentment. And there was no love either. When did I stop loving him? Nellie wondered. She had an answer to that question but wasn't ready to admit it to herself just yet. 2 months ago, Nellie had received a call from Marital, a friend she hadn't seen or spoken to since college. The call from Marital surprised Nellie. "How have you been? Are you still playing the guitar?" Marital asked cheerfully. "Oh, of course. I couldn't live without my guitar. I've expanded my repertoire, now I perform children's songs for Lyle, my son." "You had a son? That's wonderful. So, you got married?" "No, I didn't get married, it just didn't work out." "That's okay, it happens," Marital replied. "You'll find your person someday. Anyway, the reason I'm calling is that there's a festival happening in our town next month. My husband is one of the organizers, and I thought of you. You're such a great singer and guitarist. Would you like to participate?" "I don't know, it's so unexpected," Nellie hesitated. "I've never performed in front of a large audience." "What do you mean you've never performed? Remember the college concerts? And when we'd go camping, who sang us songs by the fire?" "Well, that's different. That was for fun, in the company of friends. But to go on stage in front of a big, unfamiliar audience. I'd forget everything out of fear." "Oh, come on, Nellie. You really do play and sing beautifully. Don't be afraid. Go for it." "I'll think about it, Marital, okay? Think about it. I'll give you a couple of days. I really hope you'll agree. We have so few women participating, mostly men. If you say yes, it would be fantastic." "I overheard your conversation," Nellie's mom, Frances, said as she entered the room. "You've been invited to take part in a contest." "Yes," Nellie replied, then told her mom about Marital's proposal. "Don't even think about saying no, honey," Frances exclaimed. "This isn't just a chance to show off your talent, it's also an opportunity to meet interesting, creative people. Plus, you need a change of scenery. You hardly go anywhere or talk to anyone outside of family or the moms at the playground. And you're still such a young and beautiful woman. You need a personal life." "Mom, what personal life?" "My life is Lyle, and we're perfectly fine on our own. Besides, I have you, Dad, and Agnes. You're my family. I don't need anyone else." "Of course, Nellie, we're your family and we love you very much. But you should have a life of your own too. Just because things didn't work out with Barnes doesn't mean you should give up on relationships. Lyle is getting older and will soon start kindergarten. I think now is the perfect time to think about yourself. And don't decline the festival invitation." The next day, Nellie called Marital and said she would apply for the festival. She decided to perform an original song she had written after her breakup with Barnes. From that moment, she began rehearsing daily, preparing herself for the performance. Nellie was terrified she wouldn't be able to handle her nerves, but everything went wonderfully. She didn't stumble once and performed so well that the audience applauded her for a long time, shouting, "Bravo." They loved the sad song about unrequited love, sung by a delicate blonde. "Hey, you did a great job." A tall, lean guy, another festival participant, approached Nellie. My name's Jake. Thanks, I'm Nellie. Nice to meet you. I liked your performance too. Caroline was packing her things into her bag. Today, she was finally being discharged from the hospital. Half an hour later, she and Barnes were driving home. Maybe we can stop by the store, Caroline suggested. I'll make something nice for dinner tonight, to celebrate my return. You need to rest more and take care of yourself, Barnes replied. But it's just dinner, Caroline protested. Of course, I'll be very careful and take it easy now. By the way, why don't you invite your mom over for dinner? I'd like to thank her personally for cooking for me while I was in the hospital. So, will you invite her? Barnes, are you even listening to me? What? Sorry, Caroline, I got lost in thought. What did you say? And what, pray tell, are you thinking so hard about? Caroline asked irritably. Oh, just work stuff, sorry, her husband answered. Barnes was preoccupied with how he would soon have to tell his wife that he'd lost his business and all their money, and that they would have to adjust to a completely new way of life. And then there was the matter of telling her about Lyle. He wasn't sure which piece of news would be more shocking for Caroline. And how could he possibly break all this to his pregnant wife, who had almost lost their baby and couldn't afford any stress? I think you shouldn't mention Lyle to Caroline just yet, Tabitha advised him. Imagine how overwhelming it would be for her to hear so many bad things all at once. And the news that you have a child with another woman, well, she's not going to like that. You can tell her everything later. Let her first get used to the idea of your financial troubles. Barnes agreed with his mother. It was better for Caroline not to know about Lyle for now. He would visit the boy, but in secret from his wife. Nellie liked her new acquaintance, Jake. He was just like her, playing the guitar in his free time. He had also decided to take part in the festival for the first time. They talked about music, guitars, and then exchanged phone numbers and agreed to call each other. Back home, Nellie thought she would love to have a friend like Jake. Just a friend. She sensed a kindred spirit in him. She wasn't thinking of any romance. Even though her mother kept telling her she needed to build her personal life, Nellie felt she'd never truly get over her feelings for Barnes. And how could she, when his little copy, her beloved son Lyle, was always by her side? Nellie would look at him and remember his father, and the feelings she once had for him. Jake called a few days later and suggested they meet up on the weekend at a park. Nellie agreed, but on the appointed day, Lyle came down with a fever, so she called Jake to cancel. It's a pity your son got sick, Jake said sadly. And I'm sorry. I didn't know you were married. I wouldn't have asked you to meet otherwise. Why would you think I'm married? Nellie asked, surprised. Oh, because of my son. Lyle is almost 3, but I've never been married. I wouldn't have agreed to meet up if I were. Then I'd be happy to see you when your son feels better, Jake replied. We could all go out together. I can bring my niece, she's 4 years old. That would be great, Nellie agreed. The following Sunday, they spent a wonderful day together with the kids in the park. Lyle and Dora played on the playground, rode on the carousel with the adults, and later, everyone went to a cafe for a bite to eat. Nellie hadn't felt so light-hearted and happy in a long time. From the outside, they looked like a happy family with 2 kids. Nellie didn't even notice how she had almost stopped thinking about Barnes. When he reappeared in her life to meet his son, Nellie finally realized that her love for him was gone. She had healed. A new love hadn't yet sparked. Jake was still just a friend she liked and found interesting, but it already felt good to be free from the heavy burden of the past. Barnes and Caroline walked through the supermarket. Barnes watched as Caroline habitually put the most expensive items, which she was used to, into the cart. She never thought about saving or checking prices and certainly had no idea that much of what was in the cart was now beyond their means. Maybe we should stop here, Barnes suggested. Why get so much? We still have some food at home, I bought some things the other day. We're having a celebration dinner today, remember? Caroline reminded him. Or do you think there's no reason to celebrate? Of course there is, Barnes sighed. Exactly, and we're inviting your mother. We could have invited my parents too, but Dad isn't feeling well, and Mom won't come without him. We'll invite them another day. Now, let's get some champagne and head to the checkout. Why champagne? Barnes panicked, knowing Caroline would pick the most expensive one again, and he wasn't sure if they had enough money in the account to cover everything in the cart. You can't drink, remember? Of course, I'll have juice. But nothing's stopping you from having a couple of glasses. And your mom probably wouldn't mind either. It's a celebration, we can't do without champagne. We have whiskey at home, Barnes recalled. I'm fine with a glass of that, and Mom doesn't drink, you know that. What's wrong with you? Caroline asked. You're so tense and acting so strangely, like you're trying to limit what I'm buying. I don't recognize you. What's going on? Barnes realized he could no longer put off this conversation. Caroline, I'm having serious business problems, and we're going to have to live more frugally from now on. I promise I'll get back on my feet, but it will take time. For now, though. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Before I filled the cart with delicacies and expensive organic products. So, what can we afford now? Macaroni and cheese. Or is that too much of a luxury now? Caroline, you don't have to be like that. Why are you making a fool out of me? Caroline shouted. I wouldn't have picked any of this if you'd told me right away. Here I am, planning for tonight like an idiot. Clearly, there won't be any celebration dinner now. Furious, Caroline pushed the cart aside, took out only bread and milk, and headed to the checkout. Barnes followed her, feeling awful. The drive home was filled with silence. Barnes understood that his wife was angry with him and decided not to say anything for now, to give Caroline some time to calm down and think. When they entered the apartment, Caroline headed straight to the bathroom, wanting to wash off the hospital smell and the wave of negative emotions that had overwhelmed her. After her shower, she went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, assessed its contents, and pulled out some cheese. Do you want me to cook something? You could rest, Barnes suggested softly. He couldn't stand seeing his wife so quiet and avoiding eye contact. He felt terrible. Barnes was used to seeing Caroline in a good mood, and watching her like this was strange and uncomfortable. I'm not tired, Caroline replied, pouring water into a pot and taking out a pack of pasta from the cupboard. Caroline, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Everything happened so suddenly. You were in the hospital, and I was so worried about you and our baby that I kept it to myself. I wanted to wait until you were home to explain everything. And at the store, it all just came out wrong. All right, Caroline said, I'm going to cook dinner now. We'll eat, and then we'll try to talk. These kinds of conversations aren't meant to be had on an empty stomach. You go do whatever you need to do, I need some time alone to think. Okay, Barnes agreed. Half an hour later, Caroline called her husband for dinner. She had made macaroni and cheese and brewed fresh tea. Caroline poured 2 cups of tea and sat down across from her husband. Barnes hesitated to start the conversation, waiting for Caroline to be ready for this difficult talk. So, tell me everything from the beginning, Caroline said, taking a sip of tea. How did it happen that your successful business fell apart? Nellie and Agnes couldn't stop talking. They hadn't seen each other in over a year. Finally, Agnes had come on vacation with her husband and son. Talking on the phone or even video calls just can't replace face-to-face conversations, Agnes said as they went out for a walk with the kids. Harvey and Lyle immediately ran toward the playground. So, you say Barnes showed up and wants to be in touch with his son? Yes. I was already planning to tell him about the child, but he found out first. He saw a photo of him at his mother's place. Was Barnes really angry at you for keeping his son a secret? No, we had a good talk. And you know, I feel much better now. Just because things didn't work out between Barnes and me, it doesn't mean he won't make a good father. But that's not all my news. And what else happened? Let me guess. Has an interesting man appeared in your life? That's not fair. Nellie exclaimed. You always figure everything out. I noticed right away that you've changed. Your eyes have this new sparkle. The last time we met, you were still heartbroken over Barnes, and you looked different. But now, you seem like a new person, you're glowing. Come on, tell me. Are you in love? It's too early to say, Nellie said, blushing. But I've made a new friend. His name is Jake. We met at the festival where I participated, you remember, I told you about it. Yes, I remember. Was Jake participating too? He was. He came up to me and introduced himself. And you know, we only talked for about 20 minutes, but it felt like we'd known each other forever. It's strange how that happens. Of course. That's exactly how it feels when you meet the right person. I'm so happy for you. We're just meeting up for now, going for walks with the kids. He brings his niece Dora, and I bring Lyle. It's easy being with him, we have so much in common. But I don't know yet if this will turn into something more or if we'll just stay friends. Oh, right, just friends, Agnes laughed. Do you really think he approached you and asked you out just to be friends? You're still so naive, aren't you? I don't know, Agnes. I've never dated anyone before or after Barnes. So, I'm not exactly experienced in relationships with men. And maybe, deep down, I'm afraid of getting into something serious again, afraid of getting hurt. I think you're already falling for this Jake, Agnes said with a smile. You just don't want to admit it yet. Don't dwell on the negatives, sis. No one knows what tomorrow will bring, but if you're happy today, enjoy that happiness. Caroline listened carefully to her husband. So, I lost the business, and now I still have debts to pay, Barnes concluded sadly. How did that happen? Caroline wondered. I thought you were an experienced businessman, but you allowed yourself to be set up like this. Did you really know so little about the people you've been doing business with for years? I thought I knew them well. But by the time I started to suspect something, it was already too late. I tried to salvage the situation, but no luck. Now I realize I should have been managing everything on my own all along, but Barnes stopped short, almost saying something that might have hurt Caroline's feelings. Of course, he didn't blame her for anything and believed he was solely responsible for his troubles. But at the same time, if it hadn't been for the frequent trips abroad to luxury resorts, he might have kept things under control. However, after the wedding, Caroline wanted to see the world and travel. Barnes couldn't deny his beloved wife and hoped that each time they went away for a couple of weeks, nothing would happen. He trusted his business partners, but as it turned out, he was very wrong. What were you about to say? Caroline asked, looking at her husband questioningly. Oh, nothing, he replied. Caroline, I'm planning to sell my car. That'll help pay off part of the debt. I'll get something more affordable. And how do you plan to pay off the rest of the debt? Caroline asked. Should I sell my car too? I'm not suggesting that, Barnes responded. At least Caroline should have something left from their comfortable life. They still had an apartment with good renovations and expensive furniture, and Caroline had her jewelry. This is such terrible timing, Caroline exclaimed. Why now, when I'm expecting a child, does all of this have to happen? How are we going to raise the baby? How are we going to live? I promise we won't go hungry, and the baby will have everything he or she needs. I'm looking for a job right now, and I already have a few decent leads. Yes, we'll have to live much more modestly, but in time, I'll try to start a new business. Caroline, I want you to trust me and not lose faith in me. Barnes, I don't know what to say right now, Caroline replied. This is all so sudden. I need time to get used to it. I'm tired, I just want to sleep." "Of course, get some rest," Barnes said, rushing to help. As she drifted off to sleep, Barnes thought about how just a month ago, he had been completely happy. Now, he felt like a failure, a man who not only lost his business but could also lose the woman he loves. Could his mother be right that Caroline had only been with him because he provided for her so well? He really didn't want to believe that. That night, Caroline slept poorly. Troubling thoughts kept her awake. When she married Barnes, she was sure that with such a man, she would always live comfortably, as that was her dream. And now, she would have to give up the familiar comfort. All the housework would fall on her since they could no longer afford cleaning services. Expensive beauty salons would be a thing of the past, and hiring a nanny was out of the question, meaning she'd have to take care of the baby herself. Caroline pictured herself with greasy hair, sleep-deprived and stressed, wearing a worn-out robe. In one hand, she'd be holding a crying baby, and in the other, a spoon stirring porridge in a pot. Somehow, the role of a young mother now seemed to her like this. She had thought that having a baby wouldn't drastically change her life. She imagined continuing her visits to salons and fitness clubs, shopping, meeting friends, and reading books while the nanny took care of the baby. Caroline often envisioned herself leaving the house with a stroller, looking beautiful and fresh, still slim, catching admiring glances as she walked along the sidewalk. Barnes would be endlessly grateful for their son or daughter, becoming even more tender and caring. And when the baby grew a bit older, they would fly off to the sea, to Bali or the Maldives. Of course, the nanny would go with them so that she and Barnes could enjoy their vacation. The thought that all her dreams had collapsed made her want to cry. She felt sorry for herself and her future child, whom she wouldn't be able to give the best of everything. Just before dawn, Caroline finally fell asleep, and when she woke up, Barnes was no longer by her side. Barnes had left early. He had 2 job interviews that day and had also found a potential buyer for his car. Additionally, he wanted to visit Lyle. After their first meeting, Barnes had only seen his son once more, and he was eager to hug the boy again. Thoughts of Lyle gave Barnes strength during this difficult time in his life. He couldn't have imagined that everything he had worked so hard to build could crumble so quickly. At the same time, he realized that money and wealth were not the most important things. They could come and go. But there was something much more significant that couldn't be bought with any treasure: love and support from loved ones, family, and children. For the sake of his loved ones, he was willing to try to move mountains and reach the pinnacle of success again. However, he didn't yet feel support from his beloved wife, and that deeply saddened him. Nellie and Jake were sitting at a cafe table, waiting for their order. It was their first time meeting alone. Before this, they had always brought their children along. Nellie was very nervous about the date. She had spent a long time in front of the mirror, trying on different outfits. In the end, she decided on her favorite old jeans and a t-shirt, pulling her hair back into a tight ponytail. "Is this really how you're going to a date?" Agnes asked, appalled. "I don't want Jake to think I'm trying to seduce him," Nellie replied. "And I've gotten out of the habit of dresses and heels. I feel uncomfortable in them, like a doll. Since Lyle was born, my favorite clothes are jeans and sneakers." "You can't think like that. Come on, open the closet, let's see what you have," Agnes insisted. In the end, Nellie had to leave the house in a dress and elegant heels. Agnes styled her hair beautifully and made her put on some makeup. "Wow," the girl exclaimed when she looked at herself in the mirror. "Is that really me?" "Of course it is. It looks like you've forgotten how beautiful and feminine you can be. Go on, sister, and charm your Jake. Be confident." Jake was pleasantly surprised when he saw Nellie. He couldn't take his eyes off her in admiration, then he snapped out of it, handing her a bouquet of roses and saying, "You look extraordinary today. Very beautiful. That dress looks perfect on you." "Thank you," Nellie replied, thinking about how long it had been since she last received a compliment from a man. It felt so nice. After washing up and having breakfast, Caroline decided she needed to talk to someone about what was troubling her, so she thought of Daisy. Her best friend had always been ready to listen. Caroline called Daisy, who had a day off. They decided to meet in the park. "I'm glad you were discharged from the hospital and the baby is safe," Daisy said when they met. "You look great, pregnancy suits you. It won't last long." "Soon I won't look so great," Caroline replied sadly. "Why not? Are you still worried about gaining too much weight?" "No, it's not that." Caroline then told Daisy about Barnes losing his business and how they would have to adjust to a much more modest lifestyle and make many sacrifices. "That's certainly very unpleasant," Daisy said after listening carefully. "But it's not the end of the world. I'm sure Barnes will be able to get back on his feet. He doesn't seem like the type who gives up easily. But when will that be? And he needs money to try starting a new business again. Barnes has a mountain of debt. He spent all his savings and plans to sell the car to pay off part of the debt. Are you planning to sell your car too?" Daisy asked. "Me? I can't be without a car. I need it for going to the hospital, visiting my parents, and I just don't want to part with this car. I'm so used to it, it's mine. But your car is very expensive and costly to maintain. Given the changed financial situation, are you sure you can handle such expenses? You could sell it and buy something simpler. The money from the sale would help your husband pay off the debts." But Caroline didn't know how to respond. She understood that her friend was making a valid point, but she was reluctant to part with her beloved car. It was a gift from her husband for her birthday. It was the car of her dreams. "Daisy, I don't know. Maybe I seem like a selfish person to you." "Well, a little, to be honest," Daisy nodded. "Your husband is in a difficult situation, and as his wife, you should support and help him. Instead, you're clinging to this, albeit expensive, but still just a hunk of metal, instead of helping Barnes." "Hunk of metal? This hunk of metal is worth as much as a nice apartment," Caroline said, a bit offended. "That's exactly my point. That money could help your husband settle his debts. If I were you, I wouldn't hesitate. Even though you haven't hidden that you always wanted to marry a rich man, I thought you eventually grew to love Barnes. Or am I wrong?" When Caroline got home, the first thing she did was go online and post an ad to sell her car. The words her friend had said kept echoing in her mind. "If my Jackson were in a tough spot, I'd do everything in my power to help him. Otherwise, what's the point of having a family if you're not there to share each other's burdens?" It may sound cliché, but that's how I see it. Otherwise, I don't see the point in being together and building a future. After talking to her friend, Caroline felt for the first time in her life that she was being selfish and looked at herself from the outside. She had always thought she was doing the right thing. Of course, when she married Barnes, her primary goal was financial security, but she also tried to be a good and caring wife, creating a cozy atmosphere in their apartment so that her husband would always want to come back there after a stressful day. Now she was preparing to become a mother because she understood that without children, they wouldn't be a complete family. Caroline also kept pondering her friend's question about whether she loved Barnes. Strangely, she had never considered this before. She knew that her husband loved her, and that seemed sufficient to her. Being with him felt easy, comfortable, and secure. She really liked Barnes. But love? Perhaps not everyone experiences that kind of love where you can't breathe without that person. Caroline had read about such love in books but had never felt it for anyone herself. And now she couldn't answer whether she loved her husband. Maybe she did, in her own way. Not with madness, but still. Caroline could honestly answer one question for herself now: she was ready to support Barnes through this difficult time. She still wanted to be by his side. Barnes met with a potential buyer for his car, and after inspecting the vehicle, the buyer agreed to purchase it. After that, Barnes headed to another job interview. Following the interview, he planned to call Nellie to ask if he could see his son today. He really wanted to spend time with Lyle. Looking at his watch, Barnes realized he had almost an hour before his interview and hadn't eaten anything since morning. Glancing around, he spotted a cafe and decided to go in for a quick bite. After sitting down at a table and browsing the menu, he signaled to the waiter that he was ready to order. At that moment, he noticed a beautiful blonde woman sitting by the window with a young man. They were talking animatedly and looked very happy. It took Barnes a moment to recognize Nellie in this beautiful woman. He couldn't help but admire her. When they were together, Nellie rarely wore makeup, and she often tied up her luxurious golden hair in a ponytail or braid. She always dressed simply, preferring jeans and t-shirts to dresses and skirts. But Barnes liked her natural look and her open, easygoing nature. Now he saw a different Nellie, very beautiful and feminine. Nellie was so engrossed in her conversation with the young man that she didn't notice Barnes, who couldn't take his eyes off her the entire time he waited for his order. He suddenly wondered how his life would have turned out if he hadn't met Caroline. He would have married Nellie as he had planned, and they would now be raising Lyle together. Maybe Lyle would even have a little brother or sister by now. And perhaps he would have been happy with this kind, genuine woman. He may not have had strong feelings for her, but being with Nellie was easy and comforting. And he knew for sure that she had truly loved him. Barnes pulled himself back from his thoughts. Why these thoughts? Was he really regretting his marriage to Caroline? He had fallen so deeply in love with her. It was Caroline, not Nellie, who seemed to him like the perfect woman. But now he felt like he could lose Caroline. The thought that she might have loved the lifestyle he provided more than she loved him kept gnawing at Barnes. Deep down, he hoped that wasn't the case. Finally, Nellie noticed Barnes. She looked at him and gave a slight nod in greeting. Barnes nodded back and smiled. He didn't dare approach her, even though he had planned to arrange a meeting with his son today. Barnes was also very curious about who the young man sitting next to Nellie was and how serious their relationship might be. From the outside, they looked like a couple in love, and the bouquet of roses on the table suggested that this man was more than just a friend. Barnes suddenly felt a pang of unease. The thought of another man being around his son every day, watching over him, and taking part in raising him, pricked at Barnes' heart. What could he offer his own child? Just infrequent visits. And unfortunately, nothing could change that now. He was married to Caroline, who would soon be giving him a child as well. And of course, Nellie had every right to her own personal life. How complicated life is. How was he going to tell Caroline about Lyle? His marriage already seemed to be on shaky ground, and this news would only make things more difficult. "Is that a friend of yours?" Jake asked, noticing how Nellie greeted Barnes. "You could say that," Nellie replied. "That's Lyle's father." "Oh, I see," Jake said, glancing back at Barnes. "Lyle looks a lot like him." "Sorry if I'm prying, but why aren't you two together?" "We broke up before I found out I was pregnant," Nellie explained. "He didn't even know about the child until recently. I hadn't planned to tell him, but he found out by accident. So, I figured it was for the best." "I see. Has he ever suggested getting back together with you?" Jake asked, and Nellie sensed a hint of jealousy in his voice. "I mean, you have a child together, after all." "No," Nellie smiled. "Neither of us wants that. He's been happily married for a while, which is why he left me when he met someone else. So, apart from our son, there's nothing between us." "Well, he sure seemed interested in you. You might not have noticed him at first, but I saw that he couldn't take his eyes off you," Jake said. "I don't know," Nellie shrugged. "I don't really care. That chapter of my life is over. And as far as I know, he loves his wife very much. Plus, she's expecting their child now. Let's not talk about him anymore." "Of course, sure," Jake nodded. "Maybe we could go for a walk." "Sounds good," Nellie agreed. They left the cafe, followed by Barnes's gaze. Caroline was bustling around the kitchen, waiting for her husband to come home. When Barnes finally walked in, he immediately caught the delicious aroma of food cooking, which he took as a good sign. Maybe Caroline was no longer upset with him. "Hi," Barnes said as he entered the kitchen. He noticed the beautifully set table, which lifted his spirits. "Hi," Caroline smiled back. "I hope you're hungry." "Very hungry," he replied. "Great. Then wash up and come to the table. Everything is ready." Barnes went to the bathroom, feeling that things were starting to get better. Caroline was welcoming him again with a smile, just like she used to. He felt a bit ashamed of his thoughts earlier at the cafe when he saw Nellie with that man. How could he have even briefly considered that he might have been happier with someone other than Caroline? No, she was his life and destiny. Nellie was just the woman who had given birth to his son, and he was grateful to her for that, but he could never be with her because his heart belonged to someone else entirely. "Did you manage to find a buyer for the car?" Caroline asked as they sat down to dinner. "Yes, I might be selling it tomorrow. I put my car up for sale too." "Really?" "Yes, someone called today to inquire about it. If everything goes well, we can clear all our debts." "Thank you, Caroline. I'm sorry that you have to sell your car. I know how much you wanted it." "Yes, I did want it. But I wouldn't be able to drive it now, knowing that you have debts. At first, I thought I'd sell it and buy something simpler. But then I decided I could do without a car for now." "Thank you, Caroline. If we can get rid of these debts, things will be easier. By the way, I got a job today. I start on Monday. It feels strange. I'm not used to working for someone else anymore. But the pay isn't bad, although compared to what I used to make, it's practically nothing." "It's okay, Barnes. We'll figure it out," Caroline said, taking his hand. "We'll get through this. I've got some savings, and you've given me so much jewelry. We'll manage." "Oh, Caroline, my dear, I needed to hear that," Barnes replied. "I was so afraid of losing you because of all these problems." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "And besides, you're my husband, and I don't need anyone else. Let's make a deal, no more secrets from each other. No matter what happens." "Agreed?" "Of course," Barnes answered, though his mind was once again on Lyle. How could he tell Caroline about his son? "No, not now. What are you thinking about?" Caroline asked. "Is something bothering you?" "No, everything's fine," Barnes lied. "I'm just happy to have you with me. We'll be all right. I'll try to start my own business again, taking into account all the mistakes I've made. And if you're interested, maybe we can do it together." "Why not?" Caroline said. "But first, I want to have a healthy baby." 5 months had passed. Nellie and Jake's relationship was progressing quickly, and they were now preparing for their wedding. Jake had his own apartment, where Nellie and Lyle planned to move right after the ceremony. Barnes continued to meet with his son from time to time, still keeping his existence a secret from Caroline. Caroline's pregnancy had been quite difficult. She had been hospitalized twice to prevent any complications. Barnes feared that revealing the news about his child with another woman could negatively affect her condition. Tabitha had advised her son to wait until Caroline gave birth before confessing. On the day of the wedding, a woman hairdresser arrived at Nellie's home to do her hair. The hairstylist had been recommended by Meryl, a former classmate who had previously suggested Nellie participate in the festival where she met Jake. "Daisy is a real magician. I'll give you her number, call her and set it up, she'll do an amazing job with your hair," Meryl said when she and Nellie were talking on the phone. Meryl was right. Daisy was indeed a true artist. She spent nearly 2 hours working on Nellie's hair, but the result was worth it. Daisy also turned out to be a very friendly and talkative girl, and she and Nellie chatted cheerfully as she worked. At one point, Lyle entered the room. The boy looked on curiously at what was happening and greeted the unfamiliar woman. "Hello. Hey there, little one," Daisy exclaimed. "What's your name?" "This is my son, Lyle," Nellie replied before turning to the boy. "Lyle, go play in the other room for a bit, okay?" The boy nodded and left. "You have a lovely son," Daisy said sincerely. "Although I'm surprised you have a son, you look so young. I wouldn't have given you more than 20. "I'm almost 28, Nellie replied. "Thanks for the compliment. Are you getting married for the second time?" Daisy asked. "Sorry if it's a sensitive question. You don't have to answer if you don't want to." "No, it's fine, ask away. I'm so happy today that I can calmly talk about the past, which once brought me pain. I'm getting married for the first time because Lyle's father left me before he was born. Though he didn't know I was pregnant when we broke up." "Wow. So, he didn't know about his son?" "He does now." Nellie's mother entered the room, holding her phone. "Sweetie, Barnes is calling. Do you want to answer?" "Yes, I'll take it," Nellie said, grabbing the phone. Barnes was calling to congratulate Nellie on her wedding and also to ask if she wouldn't mind him taking Lyle to the amusement park in a few days. "Nellie, I'm sorry, but I overheard your conversation and realized it was your child's father who called," Daisy asked after Nellie finished the call. "Yes, we're on good terms now. He's the father of my son, and I don't stop them from seeing each other." "Is he married?" "Yes, that's why he broke up with me. He met someone else. By the way, his wife is currently expecting, which is why he hasn't dared to tell her about his son. Caroline's pregnancy has been difficult. His wife's name is Caroline." "Yes, why?" "Oh, I used to know a Barnes. But it's probably a different person." "Yeah, it's not the most unusual name. Want me to show you a photo of him? I recently took a picture of him and Lyle together." Nellie showed Daisy a photo of Barnes, smiling while hugging his son. Daisy had no doubt, it was him. Caroline's husband, her best friend's husband. "What do you think?" Nellie asked. "Does he look like your acquaintance?" "No, not at all," Daisy said as casually as she could. There was no need to pursue this topic any further, everything was already clear. Barnes had a son from his ex-girlfriend, and he was hiding it from his wife. Returning home, Daisy couldn't shake off what she had just learned. To think that her client turned out to be Barnes's former girlfriend, and to top it off, she had a child with him. Poor Caroline. She had no idea. These thoughts were now constantly troubling Daisy. Of course, she had no intention of telling her friend anything. First, it wasn't in her nature to interfere in someone else's family matters. Second, Caroline was already going through a tough time. The difficult pregnancy had worn her out, and she was constantly on edge. Caroline didn't look like a happy woman eagerly awaiting the birth of her daughter. It wasn't just the discomfort of her pregnancy that was weighing on her. Their financial situation was becoming more distressing by the day. At first, she thought it was temporary and they would get through it, but now she was increasingly starting to feel that marrying Barnes might have been a mistake. All her savings and expensive jewelry, which she had hoped would help them stay afloat for a while, had gone toward paying off Barnes's debts. As had the money from selling her car. Barnes had to sell his own car for a very low price. The thing was, on the morning he was driving to meet the buyer, he got into an accident. Barnes himself wasn't seriously hurt, but the car wasn't so lucky. It needed costly repairs, and Barnes didn't have the money for that. Naturally, the buyer didn't want to purchase a damaged car. However, the owner of a repair shop offered to buy the car from Barnes. He agreed. Caroline was extremely upset when she heard about the accident. How could this happen? You had already found a buyer, and now? Why are you so careless? How are we going to pay off the debts now? Now I'll have to sell my jewelry and use up all my savings. I was hoping to keep at least something for a while. Barnes was unpleasantly surprised by his wife's reaction. For some reason, he thought a loving woman would first be happy that her husband wasn't seriously hurt. But Caroline didn't even ask how he was feeling. Even the money they managed to get from selling the car and Caroline's jewelry wasn't enough to completely clear all their debts. Fortunately, Tabitha came to their aid. She had some savings of her own. With their combined efforts, they managed to settle the debts. And so began a modest life on the salary Barnes earned from his new job. He dreamed of starting his own business again, but that required capital, and he had nothing left. One day, he suggested to Caroline that they sell their large, well-renovated apartment, buy something simpler, and use the remaining money to start a small business. But she refused. "The apartment is the only thing we have left. I don't want our child growing up in some dump. Don't even think about it." At first, Caroline tried to support her husband, but she was gradually becoming more disillusioned with him. After the incident with the damaged car, Barnes started to seem like a failure to her. And she despised failures. Sometimes, Caroline thought that if it weren't for her pregnancy, she would have left Barnes. The young woman was becoming more and more irritable. The lack of her usual comforts and the need to economize drove her crazy. She was increasingly taking it out on her husband, and daily outbursts had become the norm in their family. Caroline's hope that she and Barnes would overcome all difficulties together turned out to be in vain. She soon realized she didn't want to struggle through anything. She wanted everything immediately, just as she had expected when she married Barnes. With each extra pound gained during her pregnancy, Caroline became more bitter. She had always considered her beauty her greatest asset, but now her reflection in the mirror only upset her more. She was angry at her husband, herself, and even the daughter she was carrying. Caroline was becoming unrecognizable, and it was getting harder for Barnes to be around her. "Sometimes, I feel like she hates me," he finally confided to Tabitha one day. "The Caroline I married and happily lived with for 3 years is a completely different person from this Caroline. I understand hormones can cause mood swings and heightened sensitivity in pregnant women, but to change this much? Yesterday, I couldn't hold it in and suggested she see a psychologist. She got so mad, yelled that she wasn't crazy and threw our wedding photo frame at me." Wow, his mother shook her head. "But I think it's not just about the pregnancy. What else could it be? You won't like this, son, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've mentioned it before, I've always thought Caroline wanted a comfortable, well-off life when she married you. She's not handling the hardship well. But we aren't living in poverty," Barnes protested. "Maybe it's enough for you, but she loves a luxurious life. Fancy clothes, resorts, restaurants. That's why she's angry and resentful toward you. And she can't leave because she's pregnant. Otherwise, she would have left already, believe me. I hate to admit it, but I've realized the same thing for a while now. Caroline isn't the kind of woman who's ready to be with her husband through thick and thin, in good times and bad, in wealth and poverty. She tried in the beginning, she supported me, but once she had to give up all her savings and her precious jewels, she showed her true colors. Could I have been so wrong? What am I supposed to do now?" "You have a baby on the way," sighed Tabitha. "Let Caroline give birth, and then we'll see. Maybe motherhood will change her." "I don't know," Barnes said. "I remember how she used to be, so cheerful, so warm. And then I look at who she is now. I can't tell if I still love her or just miss the woman I used to love." A month later, Caroline gave birth to a daughter they named Violet. The delivery was complicated, Violet was born weak, and Caroline took a long time to recover. Barnes took a leave from work to care for his wife and newborn daughter. Tabitha moved in temporarily to help out. Caroline experienced postpartum depression. A psychiatrist evaluated her and prescribed antidepressants. Little Violet had to be switched to formula. Caroline rarely went near the baby, she spent most of her days either sleeping or lying in bed, browsing her phone. Sometimes, she would turn toward the wall and cry quietly. Barnes and Tabitha tried to involve Caroline in caring for their daughter, hoping that taking care of the baby might help her bond with Violet and recover more quickly. But Caroline remained completely indifferent to her child. Barnes spoke with the doctor about Caroline's condition, but the doctor didn't provide any specific answers. He only advised Barnes to be patient and surround his wife with care and attention. Some time passed. Barnes's leave ended, and he returned to work, leaving Tabitha to take on full responsibility for the baby. Caroline still showed no interest in caring for their daughter. However, Caroline's condition noticeably improved. She started jogging in the mornings, taking better care of herself, and even seemed more cheerful. She began cooking meals again. But when Tabitha asked her to help with the baby, Caroline would respond that she still wasn't feeling well enough. Occasionally, she would agree to feed Violet formula or change her clothes. Barnes and Tabitha started to hope that soon everything would get better and that Caroline would fully embrace her role as a mother. But then one day, Caroline disappeared. She went out for her morning jog, as usual, and didn't return. Barnes called her parents, but they said she hadn't visited them. Caroline's phone was out of reach, she had apparently turned it off. Daisy, Caroline's friend, also didn't know where she could be. They hadn't seen or spoken to each other lately. Barnes, now deeply worried, didn't know what to do or where to look for his wife. But that evening, he received a message from her, "I'm sorry. I've met another man and am leaving to be with him. Let Violet stay with you, I'm a terrible mother anyway. She'll be better off with you. Don't look for me. I'll reach out when I'm ready." Barnes managed to see Caroline only 2 weeks later. She called him herself and suggested they meet somewhere in public to discuss a divorce. It turned out that Caroline had been in contact with an old admirer, Matt, with whom she had a romantic relationship during her college years. However, things hadn't worked out back then because Matt wasn't financially stable at the time. Caroline broke up with him as soon as Barnes, who seemed more promising, came along. Matt, however, had never been able to forget the beautiful Caroline. Unlike Barnes, he fully understood that Caroline loved a luxurious life and that she primarily wanted financial security from a man. When his fortunes improved, he reached out to Caroline, telling her he still loved her. At first, Caroline, still recovering from childbirth, didn't take Matt or his words seriously. But he persisted, continuing to send her messages. Initially, Caroline replied out of boredom, but over time, she discovered that Matt had become quite wealthy and was doing much better than Barnes. Caroline then thought this might be her chance. She forced herself to get out of bed, started doing exercises, jogging in the mornings, and taking care of herself. She went on a diet. She wanted to get back in shape quickly, so she wouldn't disappoint Matt when they met again, as he remembered her as a slender beauty. When they finally met, Matt told her he didn't want to part ways again. Caroline decided this was her opportunity for a new, comfortable life. But what about her daughter? Matt was honest, he didn't want another man's child. Caroline also realized she had rushed into the decision of becoming a mother. She had wanted to give a child to a wealthy, well-established husband, not to a failure like Barnes had turned out to be. "So, you don't want your daughter?" Barnes asked. By this time, he had already thought everything over and come to terms with his wife's departure. "I'm not cut out for motherhood," Caroline replied, adjusting the collar of the new fur coat Matt had bought her. "You were the one who dreamed of having kids, not me. Maybe someday. But for now, while I'm still young, I want to live for myself. Matt supports me in this, and he won't insist on having kids together. Didn't you have any feelings for me at all? Oh, come on. I liked you a lot. But I love successful men and don't want to count pennies. Forgive me if you can. Well, at least you're being honest now. It's a pity you didn't tell me this when we first met," Barnes smirked. "I wouldn't have married you. Be happy, Caroline. You too. By the way, Barnes, you're not all that perfect either. Why did you hide your son from me? How did you find out? Barnes was surprised. I found a receipt from a toy store in the hallway one day. You must have dropped it. I got curious and checked your phone while you were in the shower. I found a message from someone named Nellie saying you wouldn't be able to see your son because she was taking him to the doctor. I didn't know you were snooping through my phone. How long have you known I have a son? And why didn't you say anything to me right away? What difference does it make now, Barnes? Caroline answered. It doesn't matter anymore. However, if you end up getting back with your ex and she becomes a mother to Violet, I won't mind. It seems like this Nellie loves kids, so maybe it will work out for you. Not anymore. Nellie got married. Well, I guess it wasn't meant to be. And it's not meant for us to be together either. I'm sorry. I promise, after the divorce and the division of the apartment, I'll disappear from your life. Barnes watched Caroline walk away for a while, unable to believe that he had loved this woman so much and for so long had missed the obvious signs. A year had passed. After the divorce, Barnes moved with his daughter into a small two-room apartment, as they had to sell their previous home and split the money with Caroline as part of their shared assets. But Barnes was actually glad about the move. He found an apartment not far from where Nellie lived with her husband, which allowed him to see his son more often. He even managed to get along well with Jake, although he initially felt a bit jealous of him for spending time with his son. But eventually, Barnes realized how silly that was. Nellie had the right to be happy, and Lyle would always be his son. Now, he was determined to be a good father and friend to the boy. Nellie and Jake's family life was going well. They were happy and preparing for the arrival of a baby. Lyle was eagerly anticipating the birth of his little brother. One day, while getting ready to take his daughter for a walk, Barnes called Nellie and asked if Lyle wanted to join him and Violet. Of course, Nellie replied. I'll get him dressed right away. Sally and Dora are about to head home, they can walk him over to your place. Great, Barnes said happily. He knew that Jake had a sister named Sally, who was raising her daughter alone, but he had never met her. He went downstairs with the stroller and waited for Lyle. Soon, his son appeared, accompanied by a young woman and her daughter. Hello, my name is Sally. Nice to meet you, I'm Barnes. I've heard about you, Sally smiled. I hope it wasn't all bad. Barnes smiled back. Oh, no, Nellie has never said anything bad about you, Sally replied. Yes, Nellie never speaks ill of people, even if they've wronged her. She's a kind person, Barnes agreed. That's true. Sally, are you in a hurry? Barnes asked. He suddenly realized he liked this pleasant young woman. No, we were just heading home, but no one's waiting for us there except the cat, Sally said with a smile. Then why don't we all take a walk together? It looks like Lyle and Dora don't want to part either. Yay, the children shouted in unison. They immediately grabbed each other's hands and ran toward the playground. Sally and Barnes exchanged glances and smiled at each other. It became obvious how things developed between Barnes and Sally after that. Their meeting wasn't a coincidence. After his failed marriage with Caroline, Barnes saw many things in a new light. He also decided he no longer wanted to be involved in a business that took up so much of his time. He was now quite satisfied with his new job, which didn't bring in huge money, but it gave him time to spend with the people who mattered most to him, Lyle and Violet. He had to hire a nanny because Tabitha, due to her age, found it increasingly difficult to spend the whole day with the little girl. Sometimes, Caroline's parents would visit Barnes. They were ashamed of their daughter and wanted to see their granddaughter. Barnes did not prevent them from doing so. After all, they were good people and weren't responsible for Caroline's actions. Caroline had not appeared in Barnes's life again and showed no interest in their child. She kept her promise. Whether she found happiness with Matt, time would tell. Sometimes, Daisy would visit Nellie. The young women had developed a bond during their first meeting, when Daisy did Nellie's wedding hair. Since then, they occasionally called and met up. Daisy no longer kept in touch with Caroline. She was deeply disappointed in her friend when she left her daughter for a more comfortable life with another man. "I never judged you for looking for financial stability in your relationships with men, that's your business," Daisy had said to her during their last conversation. "I could even understand if you left Barnes for another man but took your child with you. But how could you abandon your daughter? I will never understand that. So, I'm sorry, Caroline, but I don't want to see or talk to you anymore. Live your life as